Island Assembly, Committee Room 30.
Allow the public gallery to fill. Sorry. Okay, can I advise those members of the public gallery that they are welcome to use mobile devices as long as they are in airplane mode and that all devices are muted. They can connect to the Assembly Wi-Fi, password details of which are available on the gallery rules, and it is not permitted to take photographs or record any of the meeting. Okay, members, anyone aware of apologies? No apologies. Okay, chairperson's business. Members, as agreed, I, Robin Newton and William Humphrey met informally with officials from the Education Authority on Thursday the 27th of February, and a complete record of exchanges are provided at page 22 of your meeting packs. I made some opening remarks at this meeting indicating the Education Committee's concerns in respect of special educational needs provision, special educational needs transport issues, special school admissions and general communication issues with EA. I reiterated the committee's previous request for open and transparent engagement, including a formal and open evidence session with the committee at the earliest possible opportunity, which is obviously taking place today. In response, the Chief Executive confirmed that she would brief the committee on the internal audit of practice in respect of SEND statements at our meeting today. In terms of the Department of Education, members will recall that the committee previously wrote to the Education Authority indicating that we wanted the Chief Executive to appear before our committee to discuss such SEND matters. The EA had produced a response to the committee's invitation and the Chief Executive had offered a briefing date in March. However, the EA has advised that the Department of Education has lately obliged it to route all correspondence and papers through the Department of Education which are intended for the committee. Consequently, and owing to some exchanges between the Education Authority and the Department for Education, no response was received by the Committee for Education, and members concluded that the Chief Executive of the Education Authority had failed to respond to our request. Members, if you are content, I propose that we write to the Minister of Education asking him to explain the rationale underpinning this new process for arm's length bodies with regards to corresponding with the Education Committee, and if necessary, further to our consideration of that explanation, to request that it be discontinued, as this is a clear example of how it has caused a specific problem with regards to our engagement on a particularly important issue. Can I ask members' views in relation to that particular matter? Deputy Chair, Karen Mull.
Chair, can you just remind the Department and the Minister that we wrote on the 5th of February asking exactly this, and if we could get that clarity as soon as possible?
Members otherwise content with that approach? Yep. Okay then, members. The National Children's Bureau has produced a report with regards to emotional health and wellbeing. The committee had sought sight of the NCB scoping report, and the department published the report late last week, just after it had forwarded to the committee. The report is included in correspondence. Are members content to invite the NCB to come to the committee in order to brief on the report and discuss the report?
Yeah.
Agreed?
Great.
Okay, can I also suggest to members that the authors of the UNESCO Education Centre report on the Certificate of Religious Education be invited to brief the committee?
Yep.
Agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed. Members, can I also advise the committee that we had agreed to meet informally with the Children's Law Centre on Tuesday the 10th of March in order to familiarise ourselves with key issues relating to the new Special Educational Needs and Disability Framework. Related formal oral briefings from the Strategic Leadership Group and the Education Authority and the department will be on the 11th of March. So the meeting has been arranged for next Tuesday, the 10th of March, at 1 p.m. in the members' dining room. Members content with that? Karen? Yep.
I need to give my apologies. I don't know about you, but I checked my diary. I have 4 other things at that time next
No
week.
problem. I think the intention is for it to be in advance of the briefings on that Wednesday, so we'll endeavour to get good written notes of what is raised at that meeting to you. Content with that? Yeah. Okay, members? Okay. Okay, then, our joint meeting with the with the Committee for Economy on the Department of Economy 14 to 19 strategy. Can I ask the committee to formally agree that we hold a joint session with the Committee for the Economy on Wednesday, the 18th of March 2020, on the subject of the 14 to 19 strategy, and to have myself act as chairperson and Kiva Archibald, who is chairperson of the Committee for the Economy, act as deputy chairperson for this joint session. Members content?
Yeah, great.
Okay. Okay, members, the draft minutes of the meeting of the 26th of February 2020 are available at page 6. Can I seek members' agreement that the minutes are a complete and accurate record of proceedings? Agreed?
Great.
Thank you. There are no matters arising, unless any members wish to raise any? No? Yeah, Daniel?
Could we touch on the coronavirus issue?
Yeah, is that coming up in any other agenda items, Clark, or content?
Okay, just to clarify, matters arising or matters which were raised at a previous meeting and have materialised since?
Yeah.
So is it a matter arising or is it an
was
AOP?
touched on in the last meeting, so I suppose it's relevant enough.
Go ahead, Daniel.
Chair, just in relation to the coronavirus, that there has been quite a number of principals that have contacted me, and I'm sure other members, quite panicked actually, about very little instruction coming from EA or the Department of Education in relation to how they should conduct themselves, or in terms of advice as to what precautions they could take to protect children and also the teaching workforce. And I think it's important, Chair, that this committee take an approach that may help action or in some way assist principals, particularly around school trips, because they're really in a state of limbo and not knowing what way to deal with it. But more importantly than that, if a particular country that they travel to is quarantined whilst they're there, what is the legal implications of that for the school? What would the cost be in getting them back? Who would the cost fall on? These are all valid questions that have been posed to me by principals, particularly when you take the uniqueness of our Northern Irish issue, in that there's quite a number of people who have Irish passports, equally quite a number have British passports. What happens in that situation, Chair, if children find themselves quarantined in a country? And also the significance of any potential legal challenge that could be posed in the event that a child is quarantined whilst on a school trip. And where the responsibility falls. There's a raft of questions that have been arisen. There's no answers to them, and it's something that principals and teachers are very, very concerned about, and certainly something that I suppose we'll raise with the Education Authority when they're invited to the table as well.
Justin?
Just further to what Daniel's been saying, I've been speaking with a number of principals from my constituency also. I'm aware that there are 12 principals who are coordinating and writing a joint signing together a letter to the Minister, which will be right on his desk today. Concerned about the ambiguity, concerned about the lack of certainty, and really wants definitive guidance from the Minister, from the First Minister also. What do they do? Are they good to go? Are they safe to travel, or should they be staying at home and have their travel costs covered? They want definitive guidance on that, so I'd very much like our committee's view tabled that guidance should be forthcoming.
Okay. William?
I would just make the point, I would have thought on these issues, I understand there was a meeting on Monday of the COBRA committee, which all the regions, nations and regions were linked into, including ministers from here. The advice surely for the health minister, for the education minister, indeed all ministers, should come initially from the health department, I would have thought. And around those issues, the information has to be the information that's disseminated. There cannot be sure a variance between the information that we have here and the information that comes from central government in London. So I would have thought that information would have been imparted at the meeting on Monday. If it isn't getting to schools, and obviously not just only schools, but across society, that's an issue. I'm not suggesting it isn't, but I would have thought that the first protocol on that information in the department that has absolute responsibility for it initially is health.
Okay. Any other members? Any brief points or questions? No? Okay. Sorry.
Sure.
Yeah,
No,
Justin?
That advice has been, notwithstanding the Cobra meeting, the advice still hasn't been forthcoming as to whether it is safe to travel. They're saying the decision is still with the principals to make. And this needs to come down to a public policy matter. The decision should be with the Minister of Education or with the First Minister and Deputy First Minister.
A one-size-fits-all, can it?
Take that.
Italy is the epicentre of the coronavirus on this continent. We've cancelled the rugby game on this island. And the France rugby game is also in question. And we are
Yeah, no, it's good.
being ambiguous about this. There needs to
Yeah.
be certainty and clarity from the top.
Look, can the clerk remind us of what actions we've taken to date in terms of seeking clarity around this from the department?
We've written to the department already, asking for clarity on the school trip issue, but I can write again, just seeking, indicating that the advice hasn't been, unambiguous advice hasn't been forthcoming yet, and asking the department for when that's going to be and what it's going to be.
Look, there obviously needs to be coordination at the very least between departments, and the Minister for Health obviously gave an updated statement to the Assembly this week where he referenced close participation with the Department for Education and the Minister for Education. I think the fact that questions are still being asked, though, does suggest that some clarity from the Minister for Education, even if it is to advise what advice he has taken from the Minister for Health, is put into the public domain. I think the key issues here is advice to schools about containment practice, travel guidance, and what practical support is available to them. And I asked them at the Assembly during the Minister for Health statement whether this advice had been communicated direct with schools, because it's one thing to say look at websites or whatever, but I think as members have raised that schools are obviously a population of particular relevance here. So if we can reiterate that request for urgent confirmation that schools have been clearly advised as to best containment practice and travel guidance, members be content to consider the response once received.
I think it's
Daniel?
important that we identify whose responsibility it is to actually advise the schools, because this is where the confusion seems to lie. And the principals that I've spoken to, and I've had significant emails in the last week in relation to it and phone calls, the principals are saying that any contact they've had with the EA, for instance, they're saying, well, it's up to the individual principal of that school. In my opinion, given the numbers of schools that we have across Northern Ireland, that is not an appropriate approach to something that is as important as this particular issue, particularly when it's the healthcare of our children. The Department of Education, certainly the Education Authority, have a responsibility to ensure that principals and teachers are protected, the schools are protected, and that they're given proper and accurate advice as to the steps that are taken, and also that there will need to be an element of funding provided to schools to ensure that in the case of an infection, for instance, as an example, that what happens if a school needs cleaned down? Who pays for that? Where does the cost fall? Does it fall to the school? Because certainly in line with the budgets that they currently are struggling with, that wouldn't be an appropriate course. So there needs to be clear questions asked of, in the event of an outbreak of a particular school, what happens in terms of decontaminating that school, who's responsible for the cleaning costs of that school, and also for any cost incurred in relation to this virus on a particular school. That's all the questions that principals are asking. And can I say, Chair, that when they have contacted EA, more than 3 principals this week have told me they've been most unhelpful in terms of providing guidance to them in relation to this, what is soon to become a pandemic.
Yeah, ensuring that schools have had full and proper advice and support is absolutely vital. Members are content, we will request that urgent clarity, and if not content with the response, I'd be content to request that lead senior official from the Department of Education come to the committee in order to orally brief on those matters and or take questions if members still feel that a lack of clarity has provided by the time we get to next Wednesday, because this is obviously an emerging developing issue.
Chair,
Yeah, Justin, go ahead.
There's schools scheduled to travel on Saturday. That
Okay,
advice
well
has to be
that's why I'm
happening
saying we obviously need
overnight.
an urgent written response. If for any reason we're not content with that, then I think we move to requesting an oral presentation on the matter from a lead senior official or the Minister. Members content with that? Yeah. Okay. Moving on then, members, to agenda item 5, our Education Authority oral briefing on the audit report of the SEN assessment and statementing process. Can I refer members to the following documents? Our clerk's cover note on the SEN statementing at page 14, Education Authority briefing paper at page 27, SEN Code of Practice at page 33, and departmental correspondence regarding the Education and Health SEN Cooperation Working Group at page 131. Can I remind members again that it is not the committee's role to interact with ongoing HR processes in arm's-length bodies, particularly where this may expose the committee or individual members to the legal consequences of prejudicing those processes or violating the privacy or rights of individuals. I would also advise members that consequently require us to focus on the key issues before us, namely the extremely important matter of the special educational needs statementing process. Can I welcome the Education Authority Chief Executive, Sarah Long, the Assistant Director for Pupil Services and Procurement at the Education Authority, Ms Donna Allen, and Ms Cynthia Curry, Head of Transformation at the Education Authority. You're very welcome today. In terms of brief opening remarks from myself, this Education Committee has obviously received and expressed profound concern for the Education Authority SEN provision over many years. That includes the complexity and the delay of the SEN statementing process, and therefore access to SEN support for children and young people in Northern Ireland and indeed their families. It also includes the way in which Belfast Special School area planning was handled, instances of non-verbal children with special educational needs being left behind on EA transport, excessive journey times for EA transport, lateness to school, and even being dropped off to wrong addresses. I personally submitted a petition signed by over 6,000 parents and guardians to the Minister for Education in opposition to the Education Authority Children and Young People Services attempt to reduce SEN nursery hours to part-time provision. So these are matters that this Education Committee has had extreme concern for. I would, however, remind us all, as has been mentioned in our pre-meeting today, that our guiding responsibility today is to deliver openness, transparency and answers for children in Northern Ireland with special educational needs, for their parents and guardians, and the teaching and non-teaching staff working to support them. So we welcome your presence here today, and we look forward to working to secure that outcome for children with special educational needs this morning. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank the committee for this opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the findings of our audit of practice in special education and specifically the current statutory assessment process. I know from speaking to parents, children and principals since I was appointed as Chief Executive in April 2019 that the statutory assessment and statementing journey is a critical process for all involved. It is a highly complex area, but it is one where it is essential that the processes exist to meet the needs of individual children at all times. As the audit report has found, however, this has not always been the case, and we have identified significant shortcomings in how the Education Authority has managed this process. This morning, I want to share those findings with the committee to detail the recommendations and demonstrate that measures have already been implemented which are having a positive impact upon those who have been waiting too long for the statementing process to be completed. It is my intention to provide the full report to the committee at the appropriate time, and I understand the committee's frustration that I am unable to do so today. However, we have provided a briefing document and I can outline the salient findings and recommendations. We are also happy to return to the committee to discuss the full report. Much of the work that my colleagues do at EA is excellent, and we are committed to creating an organisation which is focused on putting the needs of children to the fore of everything that we do. That undertaking to change is already underway, and since becoming Chief Executive, we are now delivering across a range of work streams. For example, leading together with school principals through locality leadership networks, improving communications, the introduction of the new health and wellbeing strategy and coaching programmes for principals, and the introduction of an online admissions process for parents and schools. However, as the findings of the audit demonstrate, we have fallen short of the high standards we set for ourselves and which children and families deserve, particularly in respect of the current statutory assessment process for special educational needs, which has left too many children waiting too long for the process to complete. From a strategic perspective, the report has identified a number of issues relating to information governance, compliance with timeframes, and unnecessary and undue delays in the statutory assessment process. My colleague Donna Allen, who led the audit and is the Assistant Director of Pupil Services and Procurement with responsibility for business improvement, will detail the audit's key findings and the actions that EA is already taking to urgently address these shortcomings. The audit of practice found that 85% of pupils did not complete the statementing process within the 26-week statutory period. In reality, that meant that at the time of the analysis in November 2019, there were over 1,000 children who had exceeded the statutory timeframe. I want to make clear that these delays are unacceptable. They have caused distress and worry for families, and they have delayed the provision of appropriate services to children with special educational needs. On behalf of the Education Authority, I would like to apologise to the families affected and assure them that measures are underway to address the problem. In response to the report, my colleague Cynthia Curry, as a seconded school principal, is leading a dedicated improvement team. Cynthia can address any questions you have in regard to those improvements, but the key actions include focusing resources on those children who have been waiting for the longest period, identifying reasons for the delay, and expediting the process. We are also committed to the creation of a more child-centred service. While there is still some way to go, good progress is being made, and since November there has been a 36% reduction in the number of children who have been waiting beyond the 26 weeks. When I was appointed Chief Executive in April 2019, the Education Authority's Children and Young People Services launched a Special Education Transformation Action Plan. When term began in 2019, however, I commissioned this audit to provide an independent overview of how the statementing process was being delivered and to assess performance. I wish to pay credit to my colleagues who have worked extremely hard to provide good practice in challenging circumstances, but the current system has not delivered because of poor process on EA's behalf and because there has not been a culture of proactively managing statutory assessments. Changing that culture requires a systematic change in focus towards robust management and accountability throughout every stage of the statementing process. I am sorry that this has not been the case, but through the implementation of the report's recommendations, we are making practical changes that are beginning to deliver improvements. As the Chief Executive, I want to work with the Committee, the Department and the Minister to deliver on our strategic priorities. We are doing so across the majority of our services, but I acknowledge that there are challenges ahead in this area. Changing culture and process is not something that can be achieved overnight, but we have started. And I commit to the Committee to updating them in due course on the targets that we will set for ourselves and on our ongoing progress against those targets. I will ask Donna, who was the author of the report, to now describe some of the main findings and recommendations to you.
Thank you. I suppose just it would be helpful for the committee, first of all, maybe just to talk about myself and the team that led this piece of work. So the Chief Executive asked us to do this piece of work in September 2019, and I formed a team, and as Sarah has already said, I'm the AD responsible for continuous improvement within the Education Authority. I've had considerable experience and have a background in leading improvements and service improvements, particularly in health, as an assistant director there for 7 years, targeted at improvements around statutory timeframes. The team that I formed had a wide range of skills in terms of being able to carry out an effective audit. It comprised of members that had expertise in process and system redesign, digital transformation, information governance, management information and the use of management information to drive service development, and also service development within the Children and Young People's Services Directorate. As the Chief Executive has outlined, we were asked to carry out an audit of the current administrative practices associated with the statutory statement and process within the Education Authority. Key areas that we were going to look at were information governance, compliance with time frames, and particularly commencement of time frames, and any unnecessary and undue delay. As the Chief Executive has outlined, the Children and Young People's Services already had a special education transformation action plan, and we were asked to review the effectiveness of that action plan and was it having the desired impact in terms of improving the process for children and young people. The key findings of the audit were we found that the current statutory assessment process is highly manual and administrative, and there appeared to be a number of unnecessary and undue delays in the operation of this process across all SEND teams in the authority. However, there were varying degrees of that. There was found to be a lack of management focus or accountability on the importance of the 26-week statutory assessment timeframe. This appeared to be driven by the perception that the achievement of this timeframe was not possible, and therefore cases were often managed in a reactive manner rather than proactively in order to meet the timescales for children. The audit team also found that the interpretation and handling of valid exceptions which are in the legislation was a key factor in this area. Valid exceptions, there are 7 valid exceptions contained within the legislation, and they range for things that the school is closed for a period of time and therefore Education Authority staff couldn't correspond with schools to move statements on. Perhaps the child could be out of the country. So as I said, there's 7 of these. However, we found as a team that valid exceptions, once applied, they didn't seem to be managed in a proactive manner. Routine standardised management information reports are not systematically and routinely produced or used for senior management to monitor operational performance or drive improvements. Consequently, senior management did not currently have a comprehensive overview of which children in their respective offices were waiting the longest time for the completion of their statutory assessment. The audit team was informed that there was now consistency in the current practice around the formal clock start of the statutory assessment timeframe. However, we found evidence that previously that had not been the case. There was uncertainty on the length of time taken for the provision of support for children specified in their statement. This may be due to late referrals to the Transport Department or delays in the implementation of classroom assistant resource. This timeline is not currently monitored and the audit team felt this may result in further unhidden delays once the statement had been issued. The authority operates a statutory assessment panel, and that is part of phase 1 of the actual statement and process, where decisions are made on whether a child should proceed into the statement and process. Each office appeared to operate in its own silo, and there was limited evidence of cooperation or sharing of good practice across the 5 offices. The audit team had concerns around the operation of the statutory assessment panel and some of the decisions made in that panel. There were issues relating to the performance, functionality and reliability of our Capita One system, which is our main management information system, which impacted on staff and their ability to effectively operate the statement and process. The current accommodation provided for some of the teams was not appropriate in terms of information governance. The audit team did find areas of good practice linked to a number of offices, but we felt this was attributed more to individual staff working to the very best of their ability in challenging circumstances rather than evidence of proactive and effective management. The team did recognise that staff felt that they were working to the best of their ability in often difficult and demanding circumstances, dealing with very challenging and emotive requests and queries from parents, public representatives and/or legal challenges. The team found that the majority of these queries and requests appear to be due to the delay in the current statement and process. Following those findings, the audit team compiled 10 recommendations, and those recommendations range from a change in culture in terms of the service, moving to much more proactive and rigorous managing of the statement process. We've recommended that there needs to be a new EA-wide model to include greater accountability and monitoring of performance. We have a recommendation that we need to review our Capita One management information system and to put robust management around that. The current staffing structure needs to be reviewed in terms of some of the unnecessary and undue delays. We need to review the implementation and the valid exceptions and how we as authority implement those. We've recommended that the SAP panel, the Statutory Assessment Panel and tribunal decisions are reviewed in depth and learning is taken from those. We need further cross-directorate working between special education services, transport, human resources and other areas within the authority. We need to review our existing accommodation in terms of information governance and our records management and file storage arrangements. And our final recommendation is that the authority learns from the lessons in this audit and that we transfer them to other services. Following the recommendations, and I know Sarah has alluded to this and Cynthia will go into it in more detail, there has been a very comprehensive and robust improvement plan that covers all of our recommendations and has a number of work streams.
Cynthia speaking to those, yeah?
So since the audit of practice then, in picking up on Donna's point of the 10 recommendations, we have put together a comprehensive action plan, and that action plan has a series of work streams, each with work stream leads. The team to action the plans led by myself. I'm a seconded school principal. My background might be of interest to a committee. I have been teaching for 25 years and I'm currently principal post-primary non-selective education. So through that time I have been working with many young people and families who have had special educational needs and have had significant barriers to learning. It is essential, therefore, that any improvements going forward take into account that we must be a more front-facing service and we must provide assurances and build the trust of the communities and indeed the children, young people, schools and families. With that in mind, therefore, the immediate actions around the action plan have been focused on children as individuals, and our first actions in the last number of weeks that we have been working with the staff around offices has been to look at each individual case. Our focus has been on the longest open cases. We understand that this can be a very difficult process for young people going through this, and for some children that has been a very prolonged process. So we've been hearing the stories, looking at the cases of each of those young people and trying to understand what the undue delays have been in each case and trying to expedite the process and in trying to ensure that we can remove any barriers to the statement and process being concluded for those young people. We have made some improvements in that. Obviously, we've been focusing on those outside the 26-week framework, but that is not to the detriment of those now entering the statementing process. We have around each office a member of staff dedicated to looking at the backlog of the longest open cases, but that does not take away from business as usual in the offices. We've also been working alongside the staff to look at capacity of the staff, and I would have to endorse what Donna has said about a very hard-working frontline staff who are under tremendous challenges. And one of the things that we have found as a team as we've went in is the openness to improvement and the real commitment by staff to work with the team in reviewing the processes. There is no doubt that we have had to, and we will look at accountability in each of the offices and working across offices, and we are looking at the processes so that we can further streamline the work that the staff currently undertake in each of those offices. The improvement plan will also include more longer term improvements, such as partnership working with other services, such as looking at gaining feedback, proactive feedback from children, young people, families. Looking at this as a very administrative process, so we're looking at how digitalisation might be able to help staff further, and also to look at performance across the Education Authority as a whole, and have some of the learning points that are coming out from this audit of practice in this particular service.
Okay. Officials, anything else to add at this stage? No? Okay. To summarise some of those findings then, unnecessary and undue delay in the EA assessment and statementing of support for children with special educational needs, a lack of management focus and accountability, a lack of managerial performance monitoring, limited evidence of management meetings, incorrect interpretation of valid exception reasons for delay, failure to accurately record assessment timescales and time taken to provide support for children with special educational needs, delayed provision of appropriate transport and classroom assistance support, information governance issues risking the integrity of highly sensitive information held about children with special educational needs, and some good practice attributable to individual staff working in challenging circumstances but not proactive, effective management. Whilst there has been chronic under-resourcing of education in recent years and an absence of the type of reform necessary to respond to that, the findings of this audit of the Education Authority SEN assessment and support process are shocking, but they also confirm the profound and long-held concerns of parents with special educational needs across Northern Ireland, and indeed this Education Committee. So I put to you that the findings of this report present, for whatever reason, and that's what we have to establish, the development of a culture of delay, non-compliance and a lack of accountability, and perhaps most importantly, a systemic failure of children with special educational needs by the Education Authority. Is that a fair assessment?
I think they are very serious findings, and I do take them very seriously. And as I said in my opening statement, I absolutely confirm that they fall short of what children and young people should expect from the services that we deliver. The audit has identified, as you've outlined, a number of systemic issues, and we want to move forward now to improve those issues.
Okay, and of most concern is how was such a culture and systemic failure allowed to develop?
I suppose it's a complex process, and it's a difficult assessment to make now as to what happened in the past. And what we can say is we are clear that moving forward, this will become a child-centred service. It is easy, if you like, to see this as an administrative process. It is not an administrative process. It is a process that is in place to support children and families to access the services that they need. And certainly in terms of the feedback that I have heard directly from parents and that I have heard from school principals, some of it supports that feedback, and it is important that we move that forward now and that we change that to a very child-centred approach to this.
Okay, and as the Executive Committee responsible for the governance and accountability of the Education Authority, what is the Education Authority Board's and the Education Authority Board Children and Young People Services Subcommittee response to this systemic failure of children with special educational needs?
So the Education Authority Board has been informed of the findings and recommendations of the report, as have the committee here today, and the Children and Young People Services Committee have as well. they are seeking urgent updates from us now in terms of the impact of the improvements. They are committed to the recommendations that we have made, and they are fully committed to the full implementation of those recommendations and moving forward to demonstrate, not just to describe, but to demonstrate that we are improving this process and that we are making it more child-centred.
Okay, and is this culture of mismanagement and delay and systemic failure within the EA confined to the area of special educational needs?
Well, the audit that was undertaken was specifically in this area, and it was specifically in this area on the basis of the feedback that we had received about this area. I can't say at this point in time that every single service right across the EA is operating to its maximum efficiency and effectiveness, but what I can say is that I do not receive the same level of feedback across those other services as I do on this.
Is a full independent review of the Education Authority now required to restore public confidence in your organisation?
Well, we are in the process of developing our own performance management framework and arrangements that will come forward through our board, where we will be able to easily and clearly identify the issues. Again, I believe that we have had a focus on the structures of education for a very long time, and I would like moving forward that we focus on the services that we provide to children and young people, to the standard to which we provide them and the quality to which we provide them. I believe the audit in itself shows that the Education Authority can be and is holding its own self to account, that it is coming forward with its own recommendations, and that is a start. And that we will demonstrate improvement against those recommendations, and that should help restore confidence in the authority.
Okay, I have just a few more questions before I bring members in. The findings refer to serious information governance risks. Have there been GDPR breaches, and has the Information Commissioner been informed? If so?
This is an area, as you all know, that we are dealing with lots and high volume of personal information. So in a service of that area, that size and scale, there will at times be information governance breaches. Any breach that we're aware of that is serious or whatever would be reported. If we believe it is serious enough to warrant, we would report those to the Information Commissioner's office.
And have there been reports to the Information Commissioner's office further to this audit?
We've been corresponding with the Information Commissioner. We had some questions around the service, and we've been corresponding with them, and we have provided them an assurance that we have done a thorough audit of practice and that we have a number of recommendations to take forward in terms of improving any risks around information governance in this area, and this is included in the action plan and the improvement plan going forward. So the Information Commissioner's office has been assured that we have investigated, that we have highlighted any issues that might potentially be a risk, and that we have an action plan to address those.
Okay. How many children's records were found to be incorrect?
Sorry, in terms of?
In terms of inaccuracies or?
We didn't obviously look at all. There's 22,000 children in the system, so we didn't look at all. So some of those inaccuracies may just have been about in terms of the date of referral and the date recorded on the system. So that might have been some of the inaccuracies, but there were some inaccuracies in the records that we reviewed. Okay.
You state that 85% of assessments were beyond the statutory deadline of 26 weeks, totaling 1,000 children. What reasons were provided for those statutory breaches?
I suppose all of the reasons and all of the findings in the audit. There is a number of reasons, and as an audit team we found a number of unnecessary and undue delay, and I've outlined a number of those this morning. So I suppose I couldn't say for what particular reason. There were a number of reasons, systemic reasons for those delays.
And how many remain outside the 26 weeks deadline as of today?
So as of today, that figure has reduced to, let's get the figure, 676. So there was 1,000 and it's reduced to 676.
Do you have an idea of the level of delay beyond the 26 weeks for those?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, we would.
Like the average length of time, the longest length of time?
Yeah, as Cynthia said, you know, we are looking at, and her team is looking at individual children. So every child that is over 26 weeks has been looked at in detail, and currently our longest wait is over 100 weeks, and that has reduced considerably.
So almost 2 years. There are children potentially with special educational needs, in need of special educational needs support and early intervention, waiting up to 2 years for assessment and support. Okay. Okay, keen to know as well what the impact of that lack of support could be, but conscious I need to bring other members in as well, so allow me to do that and we can return to the detail. Robin Newton.
Thank you, Chair, and I welcome the delegation coming to see us today. And I think the Chairman has already indicated this is just a shocking situation. There really isn't any other description that one could put upon it. And I kind of feel now that in many ways I have sat in my constituency office and been contacted by parents, and believing that when you take up the issue on behalf of a child, that indeed when it goes into the system, those queries were being handled professionally, and we now find that there was little or no professionalism attached to the work that was being done. And I'm sure that the folk engaged in this are not going into the office to do a bad job. I'm sure they want to do a good job. But the Chair has already indicated in that phrase, which is so concerning, systemic problems in the system. You know, it really just is really appalling. I do want to try to be positive out of this, rather than just dwell only on the negative. And perhaps you could outline, in terms of the backlog, when you think that backlog will be the 1,000 that's reduced to 626. When will that 626 be addressed and brought into line? And indeed then, would that mean that every child, or as close as possible to every child entering the system, would be dealt with within the 26-week period? And what communication has now taken place with the parents of the children, of those children affected? And I have to say that the phrase that has been used, and it's been used in this room previously, you know, what does a child-centred service actually mean in this context? And we've had that phrase used before, that we're entering into a child-centred. And I suppose your key findings have then related to the recommendations. There isn't one of the recommendations that is in any way complex. They're not complex recommendations. They're fairly simple and really should be in the culture within any sort of performance monitoring role of a person in the department and education authority. I'm just worried about when we're going to see the matter put to bed. You could.
Okay, thanks, Robin.
Well, In terms of the Cynthia's team and the improvement team, their immediate priority has been those children who have been waiting longest in their statementing journey, who are currently within the system, and that has been their focus, if you like, in terms of reducing that backlog and reducing the number of children waiting. Alongside that, the longer term action plan is around making sure that we do not then find ourselves back in this position. But we do understand that this is going to take time, and we do appreciate and feel at this point that it may take additional resource as well. And that is the work that the team are currently doing. So at this point in time, we haven't profiled our full conclusion as to when we will reach the end, but certainly that is part of the performance improvement metrics that I have committed to sharing with the committee and bringing back to the committee and sharing our performance against those metrics with the committee. There are some immediate things to attend to, some shorter term things to attend to, and some longer term things to attend to. Cynthia, do you want to say something about the child-centred service? In the
Yes,
plan?
absolutely. To pick up on that point, what a child-centred service looks like. I suppose there are multiple aspects to that, but it is that the service begins with the child. Too often we begin with the system and try to work it around the child. So we begin with the child and we work the system to that. We look at the needs of the child and we look at the needs of the child and their wider family. And we've got to get better at asking children and young people for their views. And we need to find from those who have been in the system, we need to get feedback in the near future as to the key frustrations they have found with the service. And we use that to find solutions for this service going forward. But it is also for those young people who come into the statementing process that there is proactive advice and guidance as to what the journey for the young person may look like. And ultimately then it is about when a statement is issued, it's making sure that the young person gets the provision in a timely manner and gets the right provision for their individual needs. So in my opinion, as a practitioner, it is beginning with the child and making the systems work for the child's needs rather than the other way around. And that's how I would intend to take improvement.
Can I just ask you, in terms of the communication that has taken place with the parents now, what has happened?
Well, in each of the individual cases, obviously, in the same manner that statementing would take place, there would be, at the end of a process or when a process is closing out, there'd be opportunity to get back to the parent and to discuss with them their particular case, and that would be where officers are at the moment in terms of their correspondence with children and their families. But what we'd also be saying, there is a helpline available for those who are going through the process, and that would be available for parents who continue to be concerned in relation to any of the issues that have been discussed today.
And the parents of the 626 that are still to be, are you in communication with those parents?
Well, in going through the process, there would be various communication. I think probably it would be fair to say that one of the processes that we've found that would have shortcomings around it has been the communication with parents. And certainly as we look forward, this needs to be a more front-facing service, and it needs to be a service that does communicate more proactively with the parents. In terms of the last 3 to 4 weeks that we have been involved, there hasn't been a general communication to that group as of yet.
Sure.
Thank you, Rob. I think some important questions there. First off, there are obviously parents and guardians of children with special education needs across Northern Ireland that will receive this shocking news today. Do you have a clear message to those parents in particular who will be distressed by what they're hearing today?
Yes, Chair. I think, as I'll reiterate from my opening remarks, The service that we have provided has fallen short of their expectations, and it has fallen short of the standard that we should have delivered, and I will reiterate my apology for that. And we are working through those cases on an individual case-by-case basis, and that is how we are then making contact with parents directly on a case-by-case basis. However, as Cynthia has highlighted, we do have a helpline available if parents are concerned or in distress, that they can make contact in terms of their case if we haven't been at the point where we have made individual contact with them.
Okay, can I just seek clarification as well? I had perhaps inaccurately recorded the number of outstanding cases beyond 26 weeks as 676. Is it?
676,
It's
yeah.
676, okay. And in terms of the helpline, I seek some reassurance as to the adequacy of that helpline, because we do have previous experience of helplines being put in place to respond to difficult situations and exacerbating the problem rather than helping that. So is that helpline adequately resourced, and will a parent who is a guardian distressed by today's news have timely access to a trained person to respond to those concerns?
They will, yes.
Yeah.
We will keep that under review, however, Chair, on the basis of the volume of calls, and if we need to adjust that, then we will adjust that.
Okay. I'd also be interested in hearing the intended timescales for processing the outstanding assessment cases, but maybe someone else will cover that in their questions as well. So I'll move on to Daniel McCrossan.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to Donna, Sarah and Cynthia for their presentation and contribution and insight. Like many today around this table, we have heard for months, if not years, from principals, teachers, parents, about how let down they feel by EA. What I've heard today is nothing short of chaotic, shocking, reckless, dysfunctional, utter failure in terms of how EA has conducted itself in relation to something as vitally important as our children with special educational needs. Complete maladministration, and it needs to be addressed with complete urgency. And I know, Sarah, since you've come into place, that you are taking this seriously, and it's a very difficult beast to handle, and it will take time. But I can tell you, from what you're telling me today, there's not just shortcomings. These children have been failed. This is not just a slight fall in standards. This is complete failure on the part of EA in the interest of these children and parents and teachers and principals. And I think for to find any starting point, that's where it should be in order to rectify some of the issues that are there. The audit that is carried out, it was carried out by auditors, and just clarifying that, was it?
No. Donna had outlined, I think, in her presentation in terms of the skill set of the team. It was very specifically around business improvement and information governance expertise and process systems.
Given the breakdown in trust and confidence in terms of parents, teachers, principals in the Education Authority, I'd go further to suggest that if this is the result of an audit that was carried out by the Education Authority of itself in terms of SEN, that there should be an independent review of the entire organisation, particularly after what you've just told us today. This is children we're talking about, and I know that you appreciate the seriousness of this and the challenge of the task ahead. But I can tell you from the principals, teachers and parents that I have spoken to and other members around this table, every time I am at a principal's office or with a teacher or a parent, the finger is firmly pointed towards the Education Authority in terms of the failings that they are finding continually. And I've noted the helpline. The amount of teachers and principals have told me that any time they lift the phone seeking any form of support from the Education Authority, they're often left wanting in that regard. The biggest challenge for the Education Authority seems to be around communication, a lack of it completely, with outside of the organisation. A lack of communication in schools between principals, teachers, and also in this instance with parents. That's where the big issue is. In terms of the special education needs, just to clarify, so that we're clear in the room, who's responsible now for statementing of children?
Responsibility for the statutory operations process now rests with Una Turbot,
Okay.
and Una reports directly to me now on that issue.
And when was that appointment made?
It was not an appointment, it was a temporary reallocation of duties.
Okay. And for special schools?
Ruth Bale is responsible for special schools, reporting through the Education Directorate to Michelle Corky, who took up post on Monday.
And again, is that a temporary position?
Temporary reallocation of duties.
Okay. Thank you. And just in terms of something the Chair touched on, Chair, if you give me some grace with it. The news broke around September of the issue around date stamping, correspondence that came in relation to children. And just reading here, a man who claimed to have worked on the cases for 2 months told the BBC that he was directed not to date stamp letters as it would constrain the authority to respond within a certain time frame. Now, if this audit has been carried out, what are the findings of that audit in this regard? Was someone or persons who were charged with that role directed deliberately not to date stamp that correspondence?
That was one of the areas that we were asked to look at, and I suppose the first thing as an audit team we wanted to be assured of is that that was not the current practice, and we were assured and found evidence that the practice now and the practice that we observed when we were doing the audit was that there is no manipulation of the clock start as we would describe it. So we investigated this issue considerably. However, what we did find was that historically there was evidence to suggest, and I don't know why staff were doing that, but there was evidence to suggest that the date that the referral was received was not the date that was recorded on the system. I can't comment on why that was the case, but there was evidence that that had previously been the case in a number of children's. But we were assured that that is no longer the case across all offices.
I'm glad to hear that it's no longer the case. My concern is the way it was the case to begin with, because a whistleblower has claimed, who has worked on this particular area for EA, that he or she, he in this case, was directed not to date stamp them. Now that's a very serious situation, and it also begs questions of the review that has been carried out in terms of its independence to properly get to the crux of the situation. That is a serious situation, and if we're to instill confidence in the Education Authority in relation to this, there needs to be clarity around this. So just to be clear, are we saying that the audit found that there was no direction given by anyone in a senior position not to date stamp, or anyone for that matter, these documents, or there was?
I suppose we weren't able to talk to that individual, so we couldn't talk about that particular instance. What we as a team were very clear about was, first of all, being assured that that was no longer the case. So we needed to be able to assure the Chief Executive that there was that was not happening in the organisation now. But what we did do, or what we did find, was that there was evidence that suggested that that had been the practice. Now, why it was the practice, I can't comment because we weren't able to talk to that individual. But there was evidence to show that some referrals had been date stamped, and the date recorded in that date stamp was different from what had been previously recorded on the system.
I think maybe just to say that, we take, any concerns of malpractice or any accusations in that space incredibly seriously, and that is why the audit team were specifically directed to examine that particular allegation as well. So it was a very specific piece of the audit to make sure and examine that allegation and to bring a conclusion forward on it. So considerable attention was paid to it as part of the audit.
And do you accept that there has been failings in that regard by the Education Authority?
Can I supplement that, Daniel, as well? Is the failure to accurately date stamp an assessment from date of referral an offence? It's part of a statutory process?
No, I don't think it's an offence
Okay.
as such. I wouldn't believe so. It's not an offence. No.
Okay. What
However,
type
we would
of-
recognise that it's not good practice and that it's not how we would want things to be. But again, it is one area that the audit were assured that has already been attended to, and that they have evidence that it was being routinely done in the correct way.
And what, given that it's not an offence, what is the accountability mechanism in response for someone doing that?
Well, that would be a line management issue, but it would be a line management issue that we now need to set in the context of the changes that we are making moving forward, so that everyone is clear around what their expectations are and that there's absolute clarity around what we expect.
Can I ask without, sorry Daniel, to supplement again, without prejudice to any proceedings, and if it does then obviously don't proceed, but why were you unable to talk to the individual that alleges they were directed not to date stamp letters
They didn't come forward to us.
and you didn't approach them?
They were anonymous.
They were anonymous.
Okay. Okay, Daniel, you want to proceed there? Thank you.
Just to follow on, Chair, the said individual acknowledged that staff in the department worked hard, which I have no doubt about. But he also said that files were very poorly organised, with many going missing and no prioritisation given to very urgent cases. That's a shocking statement that was revealed by a whistleblower, and thank you to the whistleblower for doing that, because I would probably argue that these reviews and reforms or internal audits would not be taking place only for this sort of revelation from the internal workings of the Education Authority in relation to special educational needs of children. And
I think just to comment on that, to say there's no doubt that there was certainly a prompt on the basis of the allegations that were made, because they were extremely serious allegations, and as an organisation we could not or would not ignore them, so there is no doubt about that. However, I would say again that since I came into post, I have met directly with parents, I have met with school principals, I have met with others, and I have received the same feedback that you are describing, and so therefore this has been an important and serious area for me as a Chief Executive to examine.
I appreciate that, and I have no doubt that you are taking it as seriously as we are, and are shocked, considering you're new to the role, about some of the findings and events that have taken place prior to your appointment. And I appreciate that from conversation that I've had with principals since you've come into the role, that you are taking it very seriously. So I would put that firmly on the record to you, Chief Executive.
Eager to move us on, Daniel.
And just
if you could
as a
round
final
up, yeah.
point, I think that it is very important that, yes, I welcome the apology on behalf of the Education Authority, Sarah, which you have put on record. I know that parents have been very stressed by the delays in waiting for their children to be statemented properly, and also frustrated by the revelations that have come since. I think it's important going forward that the Education Authority step up and say that they admit there was major failings, not shortcomings. To me, that's insulting. There's major failings, children were let down. We have learned from those lessons, and we're going to put it right. And I think that's a key starting point for the Education Authority for to build trust and confidence in the organisation again. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thanks, Daniel. Maurice Pratley.
Thank you very much, Chair. Chair, it's worrying that children may be waiting almost 2 years without statutory assessment. My own constituency in East London Derry, there's 68 currently waiting assessment. That's unacceptable, and that these children could be denied proper education based on their special needs for that length of time. It's an abject failure, I think, on behalf of the authority, which I may add has no reflection on you. You've only taken up post. However, the internal audit has identified staff failings to abide by management processes. Have the EA taken measures to remedy any of these failings and that have been identified? And I know you've identified that you've reduced the backlog by 36%. So how quickly can that backlog be brought under control, brought up to date? And what are the resource implications? What's the cost going to be to do that? Because I would imagine you're going to have to bring in extra staff to do that, you know?
Okay, so just to say that the audit was designed from the outset to identify the nature of and the scale of the issues that we had been receiving feedback on, and that was the nature and purpose of the audit, and that's what we're here today to describe to you. The piece of work that we are still reaching a conclusion on is the work that Cynthia's team is developing around how long will it take us to do this, what resource will we need to clear the backlog, and more importantly, what resource will we need to ensure that we do not find ourselves back in this position again. So again, I'm happy to bring that forward to the committee when that work is completed, but I did think it was important not to wait for that piece of work to be completed to come forward today in terms of the findings of the audit around the scale of the issues and the nature and extent of them.
Just one other point. You've identified the need for a culture change. How quickly can that culture change be initiated?
I think one of the a culture change requires you to bring the people along with you, and I think one of the positives that we do have is that going out into the offices, the staff welcome change, they welcome improvements. They have been positive in the last number of weeks that we've been working through with them, and I believe that a culture change can come about more quickly when you have that, but clearly the nature of a culture change will take time also, and we will have to put time and effort into that. But I'm heartened by the fact that we find a staff who are ready to work with us in the improvements, and an improvement team that are very committed to making sure that happens.
Sure. That's a vital point that you've raised. If you're initiating change in any organisation, if you can bring the staff with you, you're on a winning side. But I would agree with Daniel that it may be prudent to look at a full independent review of the entire Education Authority. Again, bearing reflection on yourselves being present here. Something I feel may happen. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks. Morris, can I build on that as well in terms of the staff welcoming change? Are you concerned? Do you have any ideas why the person that brought key information to light to contribute towards the urgency of the audit, for whatever reason, didn't bring that information via internal proceedings in the Education Authority?
Well, they had, as I understand it, left the organisation at that stage, but yes, the statement I made at that time was to ask anyone who had those concerns, or the person themselves, to come forward, either anonymously or through our whistleblowing process or otherwise. But unfortunately, that didn't happen.
And I presume that's a call you would reiterate to any member of staff within the Education Authority regards any issue now at this stage?
It is, absolutely, yes.
Okay. William Humphrey.
Thanks, Chairman. Thank you very much, ladies, for your presentation. Sir, in your presentation you say there were significant shortcomings and it was taking far too long for the process to be completed. You did mention over 1,000. I mean, Donnie, you mentioned 1,000 children. What is the actual figure?
It was 1,070.
Right. So what makes me very concerned about all of this is 1,070 children out of, I think you said, 22,000 children
Well,
in the system at a given time?
There are 22,000 children with statements.
Yeah. So is that 1,070 out of 22,000?
So that was 1,070 out of the total number of statements that we are currently processing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, some of those applications will be from children in mainstream education without.
Yes, but I'm trying to establish the actual figures here. in terms of percentages?
I can help with you. At the time, there were 2,268 children in open cases and 1,070 were beyond the 26.
Out of how many overall?
2,268 open cases at
Yes.
that particular.
But what I'm asking is this out of the 22,000?
No, there are 22,000 children in Northern Ireland that currently have a statement. And on average, Sensei has quoted the figures, that those are the current live statements that we have at the minute, so in terms of new referrals and children actually going through the process.
So when you hear terms like change of culture, ladies, I have to say it does give me great cause for concern. What exactly does that mean? What was the culture that allowed this to happen?
I suppose there's a number of the findings that point to that. To summarise, there wasn't that proactive management of cases. So I talked about valid exceptions, and whilst valid exceptions are absolutely legal and they are in the legislation, it tended to be once a child had a valid exception. So a valid exception could be there was a delay in receiving health advice, and we all understand that there are some delays, you know, in terms of maybe getting appointments with consultant paediatricians, whatever. So those are valid exceptions. What we found as a team was, however, that the proactive management of that case maybe wasn't as it should have been then. Once maybe the information did come back, or there was no longer a reason for the valid exception, the case wasn't proactively managed, it was more reactively. So then whenever maybe a parent rang in or somebody alluded to a delay, then the case was looked at. So we didn't find a system that was proactively
But when you hear
managing.
the term culture, that indicates to me that it's systemic, that it's widespread across an organisation. And yet, that's not what you're saying in terms of the presentation here. You're saying there obviously was good pockets of work being done around this. Can I ask then, in terms of the EA board, we obviously haven't seen sight of this full report, have they?
No,
Why is that?
because for the same reason that the committee haven't seen it, there are internal processes that need to reach a conclusion before the EA board will be in a position to see the full report.
Okay. Does the EA have an audit committee?
It does, yes.
What were they doing throughout these last number of years when this culture was prevailing?
The audit committee have been briefed on the findings of the report, and the chair of the audit committee has an oversight role now in terms of the improvements and ensuring that those improvements are put in place. And
Surely the audit committee and the chair of the audit committee had that role prior to this report. What was it doing? What was the audit committee doing? And why were they not asked to do this report? Why was Donna brought in to do it?
Well, Donna was in the organisation, and she was assigned to do the report on the basis of the skill set that she has along with the team, because they were very particular pieces of work that we wanted to understand and to test. So again, the nature of the audit was to absolutely identify what was the scale and the nature of the areas and issues of concern on the basis of feedback that had been received. So once we had the audit and we were able to very clearly identify those issues, that was taken to the audit committee and briefed.
So you mentioned, Donna, about when you give your evidence, you talked about your audit team.
Mm-hmm.
Your audit team isn't the audit.
No, it was a team that I put together to carry out the audit of practice. So
Was
it's not
anybody
the
from the
internal.
audit committee on it?
No, nobody from our audit team.
Not a bit odd?
No, there were no. This was an audit that was commissioned by me as chief executive, in terms of response to feedback received and some of the allegations that were made. So it was very much an executive team. It was very much an executive team commissioned report by me, rather than a board commission.
Has what's been described as a transformation committee been established in the EA?
Yes.
What is the transformation committee?
So transformation committee has been, or transformation team have been in place in the Education Authority since September, October 18, and we as a team are looking at designing services going forward for young people. We have myself and two other principals now on the transformation team to provide that practitioner focus. So what we've been looking at are the areas that we can try to improve services going forward, and we've been liaising and working very closely with the Department of Education in their transformation programme.
So you lead the team, Cynthia?
Yes, I've been, since coming in, I've been
And
taking
is
on
it just
ahead.
you and 2 other principals, or is it wider than that?
Myself and 2 other principals, and we have a programme lead on also.
And you're answerable directly to the Chief Executive, are you?
To the Chief Executive, yes.
Can I just ask, in terms, because in terms of the young people out there, the absolute trauma that the 1,070 children and their families in particular have been going through, and you know that during the summer I was part of a DUP delegation of MPs and MLAs who met you to raise a lot of these concerns. They have obviously been going through a dreadful time. Some of them shockingly for over 2 years. Can I ask, in terms of the culture you talked about, what is the morale like in the organisation at this time?
Well, I think as Donna has described, we have teams of people who are working very hard in very difficult circumstances. They are doing their best and they are doing a good job, but they do not want to deliver a poor service, and it is not their intention, I think, as someone said earlier, to come to work every day to deliver a poor service. So I have no doubt that they have been impacted on by the findings of this audit, but I think, as Cynthia has also described, I think that is a team of people who really want to see change and improvement, and who really want to deliver that child-centred service that we described.
Chair, I welcome, as colleagues have welcomed, the issue being investigated. I welcome the fact that we have findings, however dreadful they are, in terms of the systemic feelings of the organisation. But I do think, in terms of confidence, for me as a public representative, for confidence in terms of school governors, as of which I'm one, school principals, staff, parents, and for the very best outcome for our young people, I think an internal investigation report like this is one thing. For me, full independent inquiry or investigation is required to this to give confidence around these issues. Thank you.
Thanks, William. Officials, the Minister for Education, Permanent Secretary for Education, obviously have parent body responsibility for the Education Authority. To what extent have they been briefed on the audit impact report?
The Permanent Secretary has been briefed on the audit impact report, and I understand that the Permanent Secretary has briefed the Minister.
Have they been briefed or access to the full report?
The Permanent Secretary has seen the full report.
The full report, okay. And what has the Minister or the Permanent Secretary's response to the full report been?
At this point, the Permanent Secretary and the Department wish to understand the improvements that we're planning to make, wish to understand the timescale around those improvements, much like the committee, and that is something that we've committed to bringing forward to them.
Okay. In terms of valid exceptions, and if anybody else is going to ask about this, feel free to take it off me. Okay. But I'll leave that for Robbie then. I'd be keen that we draw out what the 8 valid exceptions are, and to what extent each individual exception played a key role in the delays. Was there one particular exception, etc.? But I'll not follow that up now. I'll leave that for a member to come in on. Catherine Kelly?
I think that today will be an extremely frustrating day for a lot of families. I think that the most vulnerable in our society, and the most vulnerable children in our society, have been left behind by the very organisation that is there to support them and to support them in education. Every week, I'm sure other members are the same, there's at least one family in my office desperate for support for their children within school, and constantly firefighting, and us alongside them. So despite the obvious consequences for the children and families, when a statement is delayed. Are there any other practical consequences for the Education Authority when statutory timeframes are exceeded? And given the fact that staff worked with the view that statutory timeframes were unachievable, what does this mean for plans to reduce the statement and timeframe?
Okay, well, I think first of all, in response to that, I would say that, as I said, the audit was designed really to allow me as the Chief Executive and us as an organisation to understand the full nature and scale of the issues based on the very feedback that you're describing. And that's absolutely what we want to do moving forward. I am determined that we will move away from the situation that you described, with constant firefighting, with constant lobbying, with constant representation, to enable children to move through what is a statutory assessment process. So I am absolutely determined that we will move away from that, and that is part of what the audit was designed to test to do, because I think you're absolutely right. I think this, as I said at the outset, it would be easy to see this as an administrative process. It is not an administrative process. It is a process that allows children and their families to access the right and appropriate support services for children, and we're absolutely determined that that's what it will become.
Chair, just one more. There's obvious issues with AT systems, which are cited in the report. Can you explain how the use of AT systems will be streamlined and made more effective going forward?
Yep. We currently have a legacy system called Capital One, and we know that that needs to be significantly modernised. So one of the recommendations in the report is to review the functionality of the Capital One system, but also to appoint a system manager. So we need expertise around some of these IT systems to be able to adequately manage them. One of the other things Sarah has alluded to, I mean, the process is highly administrative and highly manual at the minute. So we work in paper, we post and whatever. We are doing a piece of work around digitisation of some of those manual processes, and there's quite a considerable part of the work stream is looking at that. So how can we digitise some of these processes, which mean that they are much faster and much more effective? So that is a key component. And one of the members of the team, and that's one of the reasons that he was on the team, is he is our lead for digital transformation. So we are leading that piece of work around where we can use IT and digitisation to improve some of the manual processes around this to make it more quicker and effective. Okay.
Okay, Justin McNulty.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sarah, Donna and Cynthia, for coming before committee. And I appreciate it's very difficult circumstances, and I appreciate, I think we can all sense your determination to put things right. So I'd like to put on record my appreciation for that. That said, there's an overwhelming feeling of sadness, a weight of almost despair in this room that we can all sense, because young people who are most vulnerable in our society have been failed, and that is appalling. That is really, really tragic. In terms of the education authorities, I'm going to talk about the culture change, which has been mentioned by a number of members already. Culture is an abstract or airy-fairy concept, but ultimately culture is about the way things are done around here. The EA's mission is to provide a high-quality education for every child. The EA's values are openness, respect, reflection, responsibility, excellence, and equality. To what extent has the Education Authority lived up to its mission and values?
Justin, to say from the outset, one of the key pieces of the terms of reference of the audit of practice that was undertaken was to ensure that it was hinged or anchored off the EA values, and that we could test those processes against our EA values. Say more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as a team, we were very committed to those values, and those are the values that were central to. So about excellence. So when we were looking at systems and processes, we weren't saying that they were okay. We were looking at measuring them against the best and an excellent process. What should an excellent process look like? Responsibility was a key value in terms of who is responsible for this and the operations of this on a day-to-day basis, and is that something that's in place or not in place. Respect, obviously, respect for children and their parents, and respect for staff as well. So again, that was a key value. So all of those values were interwoven in terms of the terms of reference. They're also interwoven in the improvement plan as well. And it is about excellent services. We're not trying to fix this, we are trying to improve this so that no child waits longer than they should or is necessary to do so. So those values and open and transparency. And as a team, as an audit team, we worked very closely with the staff on the ground. We were very open with the staff in terms of what we found. And we also were very much that we would support them and we would help them in terms of the improvements, and that's the work that Cynthia is leading.
Well, I would only anticipate that you would seek to live up to those values. My question was, to what extent has the Education Authority lived by those values? From what we're hearing today, you may as well throw those values in the bin because they meant nothing. They were words on the wall, and that was it. And that's appalling, because children have been failed because of that. In terms of the culture change that's been discussed already, culture change is not an easy undertaking in any circumstances. And does the Education Authority have that ability within the organisation to drive that culture change yourselves? Or does there need to be an outside consultant brought in to make sure that that culture change is driven from the top and driven from every level within the organisation? Because that's essential in terms of making the changes that need to happen here to help the children who need help the most.
And I think that cultural change can only be driven from within, because it has to be driven and owned by our own teams and our own staff, as Cynthia has described. And I do believe that the work that Cynthia and the team are doing will assist us. But what I would also say is, whatever we will need to do or make an assessment of as an organisation in order to do this, we will do that.
My advice again is that I believe that outside consultation would be helpful in this regard, in terms of guiding that cultural change, in terms of the know-how to be able to do that. In terms of children's records, you've mentioned the Capital One system. Can you describe the Capital One system for me, please?
In what way? Sorry,
What it is? So every child is on that Capital One system, and every person within the Education Authority has access to that system, to each children. What is it?
So, yeah, it is our main management information system in terms of children within the Education Authority, and there are a number of what we call modules within the system, and there's one particularly around special education. So all children that are in that receive special education will be on that system and contain all of their details and who their workers are and whatever. There's a particular module that deals with the statementing process. So as an audit team, we viewed that system, we viewed how it was being used in the offices. As part of the action plan, the transformation action plan that had been commenced, there were a number of procedures put in place in terms of making sure that information was accurate going on to the system. So it previously had been 5 legacy systems, as you would understand. We had 5 education and library boards, so there were 5, if you like, Capital One systems. There is now 1 EA, so all of that information is in one area. There is limited access, of course there is, in terms of information governance and security, so only staff that work in those areas and need access to that system would have access to that system. There are shortfalls in the current system in terms of it is quite an old system, and the reporting capabilities are maybe not what we would need. But we have, as I say, in terms of the improvement plan, that is one of the actions, because it is a central repository of information, and it's also a central part of driving and proactive management, because that is where we will get our management information that we want the teams to be looking at, and that is what we're doing now. We are using the system to get us more robust management information to drive improvements and to monitor how those improvements are impacting.
Okay, that system is crucial then in terms of assessing your operations.
Yep.
Assessing, you'll be able to have quick access to data, and if you're not assessing, you're guessing. So
yeah, absolutely, and hence one of the recommendations is particularly around that area and the need for a system manager in that area, and that is part of the improvement process going forward.
Can you give me some guidance in terms of principals who feel they're not getting definitive guidance in terms of emergency cases and what actions to adopt for those emergency cases? Principals feel completely on their own, out on their own.
In terms of emergency cases of children needing provision,
Special needs, special education.
the provision, a short-term provision and emergency provision. I mean, in terms of the actual stage that a child reaches provision, i.e. from the statement of intent through to provision, we have a work stream that will be focused particularly on that particular area. As Donna mentioned earlier, there have been instances where, for example, transport has been something that the principals have brought up in the past, where class assistants, emergency class assistants have been an issue. And what the audit report did find was that some of our processes were letting us down because there wasn't good partnership working. So I suppose from my point of view, in the improvements going forward, I can say to principals that we will be doing everything that we can possible to make that a better situation. And as I said to one of the members earlier, communication is a particular aspect of the processes that we have found that needs improvement, and we will be working going forward to try to improve that. I understand as a principal myself that there are absolute frustrations around this process, and therefore I absolutely will be intending to try to make this better for principals. And it is a lonely position, and you do need that support, and we will do everything we can in future to try to make that happen.
Okay, well, you mentioned communication there, Cynthia, and I know another principal raised with me the issue of communication, whereby a lot of it through, you're trying to introduce new initiatives, and a lot of communication with principals is via email only, and they feel they're not given appropriate airtime to be able to table their real concerns, and they don't feel that email is the appropriate medium by which to do that. Tell me, what advice would you give to a principal who has 5 children who require special educational psychology need and screening, and have been allocated time for only 3?
Justin and I actually met with a group of school principals on Friday afternoon of last week around this very issue. They were representing their wider group, and I think while this report and this audit focused on the statutory assessment process, I think what it certainly highlighted to us was that the statutory assessment process is impacted on by other services, and one of the key things that has come out of that we really will need to pay attention to now and focus on is the allocation of educational psychology services, and how that currently happens and how that might happen moving forward.
Can I just supplement very briefly? The management responsibilities for the statementing process, were they the same managerial responsibilities for the allocation of educational psychology?
No, they're separate.
No? Okay. Sorry, Justin, go ahead there.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Do you feel it's a child-centred approach or child-friendly process if it's totally resource-driven?
In terms of the statutory assessment process, I think we would all accept that, as I said earlier, no, it's easy to see this as an administrative process, but it's not. It ought to be a child-centred process, and that's certainly where we want to bring this service to.
And you're focused on, determined about bringing
Absolutely determined to do that.
Given the shocking and appalling revelations we've all have been exposed as a consequence of this audit, what actions have or are being taken to hold those responsible for these failings to account?
Well, they are serious findings, as I said before, and I do take them very seriously, and I do take the impact that they have on children and families very seriously. They are not findings in their own right, they are findings that indicate to us. So at the end of the day, where there are shortfalls in the organisation, as the Chief Executive, I am responsible for that, but I am also responsible for taking forward the improvements and for driving the changes that we need to happen in terms of any internal processes within the authority. They need to be allowed to conclude.
Can I supplement it?
Do you want to supplement first, Justin?
Daniel.
You're okay, Daniel?
So I understand that as head of the organisation, Sarah, the buck stops with you.
It does, yes.
But will anyone be held accountable for these failings directly?
There are internal EA processes, Daniel, that need to be allowed to conclude.
Yes, but I'm not asking you for detail, I'm asking, will there be people held accountable for the failings within that particular area? It's a yes or no, just simply.
I'm not in a position to answer that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Justin, do you want to come back in at all? No.
Thank you very much.
In terms of Justin's question, officials, I think it's fairly clear that the Education Authority, in respect to the statementing and support of children with special educational needs has failed its mission to provide high quality education for all. You mentioned a Capita One system manager to try to ensure that that mission is improved. Has that system manager been appointed?
No, we're currently recruiting that, yeah.
What is the timescale for appointment?
These are quite skilled people, so we're actually, we've our job description finalised, and we're going to advertise that post imminently. But we need to get the right person, Chris, as well, so we need the right skill set.
Okay. Karen Mullen, Deputy Chair.
Thank you. Thank you for coming in, and as outlined by the Chair and all our members, the findings are stark and confirm for myself, families, principals and stakeholders the experience that we've had with the Children and Young People Services. Sarah, you've been up front in terms of the shortcomings, and I suppose I'm welcome that it's a priority for yourself, and you're going to be proactive on it. And it's good to see Cynthia as well in the role, because it's important that somebody who was involved in front line, knowing the day-to-day issues, is in there. I suppose looking at the report, twice last year, myself and my party colleagues, all our members, had asked the Education Authority to carry out reviews or reports, first being a year ago, last March, when the first cases of parents went to the media, and our board members at that stage asked for a review in March. There was some work initiated and started over that, but when we seen then in September, the next case coming along, or cases, like all our members, our party met with yourself, Sarah, and the chair of the board, and we asked for an independent review or audit to be carried out, or even independent oversight. According to the executive summary, Sarah, it says that you commissioned an independent internal audit, and I find that that's about a contradiction within itself. And just, I suppose, you know, as the EA, content with the content and the comprehensiveness of the audit, given the fact that it's been carried out by EA staff, and that is in no way a criticism of Donna and her team, but I just think, for the sake of public confidence and what we've heard here today, all our members, that the audit should have been carried out by people external to the Education Authority. And it is something I think needs to be looked at for going forward. If you look at the key finding, number 2 is particularly stark. It is quite clear that some staff made a mockery of the statement and process and their obligations to children and families. And this is evident by the misuse of valid exceptions. I've been in this role for 2.5 years, and I've reported this to yourself and the previous Chief Executive in what we have been experiencing, and the Chair of the Board and our Board members. Because when I've been engaging with stakeholders, like the Children's Commissioner and the Children's Law Centre, they have all raised all the findings that we have found here today. They have continuously raised them. They've had the statistics and evidence there for a very long time for the cases that they've been working with families, and it was very, very frustrating for myself and all our board members and all our members of our party that didn't seem to be acted on. And I know, Sarah, you're new in the role, and it's going to be acted on now. We shouldn't have had it with a number of cases went to the media last year to do it, and I believe that this needs to be carried out extensively and widely. In the report, you see the systems are highly manual. I find that in this day and age, you know, a bit stark, and staff worked in the belief that they didn't have to work the time frames, so timescales was unachievable. We heard here today, I would expect, I suppose, in an organisation like the Education Authority, that there would be disciplinary procedures as alongside line management going along, not just as crisis points. So management deficiencies are cited quite frequently in this document, and it is clear that many individuals are doing great work, But going by the audit, it is also clear that some in positions of management have let some of the most vulnerable children down. So I suppose I wanted to ask, is the Education Authority saying that the management is ultimately responsible for the backlog and the statements in the system?
I think, Karen, there are a number of recommendations in the report, and there are a number of key systemic issues that are highlighted, and we have a recommendation around each of those. So we're working our way through, as Cynthia has described, each of those recommendations. So I think what I would say to you is there are a range of issues that have been identified as to how we find ourselves in this position. I think it's back to your comments on the feedback that you have received are as well the comments and the feedback that I have received since I came into post, and that's part of what the audit was designed to do, which was around making sure I fully understood what the nature and the scale of the issues were, and I have confidence in the report that was completed. I think it was a detailed piece of work. I think it was a thorough piece of work. It was carried out comprehensively over a period of time. I think, as I've said earlier, it leads us to ask more questions, and it leads us to ask more questions around other service areas that are linked to the statutory assessment process. But I believe and have confidence in the report in its own right.
And just you mentioned the recommendations, and just following up on the point that Robin had made, I think they need to be firmed up. I think we need stringent line management, structure and accountability. That's coming out from all of this. And we need time frames around all of those, because this has been going on a very long time. As I say, it's the first thing came through my door when I came in, and I have said this to you in the past, Sarah. The staff member that I have has went on training, 2 sets of training with the Children Law Centre, for us to be able to deal with the amount of cases that's coming through the door. And we weren't getting, when we contacted yourselves, the advice and support that we needed. And that was an approach that I had taken. So I suppose we can't touch on any HR, anything around HR, and I wouldn't want to do. But broadly speaking, can you give us any indication of what were the governance and assurance issues that ultimately led to the temporary allocation of some areas of responsibility? No. And just a point coming as well, looking at it, we need a separate review of educational psychologists. We're constantly, meeting people and chatting to them, and they're telling us they didn't go into that role to become form fillers. That's not what they're trained for. So I think there's a separate review, and touching on what Justin said, and it's a very, very valid point, the allocation of hours, schools, the pressure that they're under in terms of that, the review needs to be done. It needs to be acted on immediately, and those resources need to come down the line. In the past, I had been constantly been told by principals around their allocation of hours, but when I discussed it with officials in the Education Authority, you were led to believe that there wasn't really allocation of hours, it was based on need, but that is certainly not the case, and it needs to be acted on.
Who is the director responsible for the management of the allocation of educational psychology hours?
Director of Children and Young People Services.
Okay, but I had asked previously if the managerial responsibility for
Oh, sorry, I had answered the previous question at assistant director level. Sorry.
Okay, so the managerial responsibility for the statementing process and special schools, and the allocation of educational psychology hours previously were allocated to the Director of Children and Young People Services. All of those matters were under the management of the Children and Young People Services Directorate. Okay, that's helpful clarification, because yeah, okay. Before I bring Robbie in, could I just seek clarification on a couple of points quickly as well? That of the 2,268 open cases, 1,070 of which were beyond the 26 weeks, which is almost 50%, I believe. Was the start date on those the actual date of referral, or a false start date stamp. So I mean, could they actually, could those cases be longer than what you've actually assessed them to be?
We didn't look at all 2,000 cases. We weren't able to do that, so I couldn't say that.
So given that you did identify the inaccurate recording of referral dates for assessments, it is possible that some of those cases are even longer than what you have, are waiting even longer than what you've established.
There is a possibility, yes.
Okay, and do you have you have, however, reduced the number of cases in breach of that statutory deadline to 676?
Mm-hmm.
What, is there a timescale for reducing that to 0?
As I said, Chris, I think we need to come back to the committee with that. Our priority today was to share the findings and recommendations of the audit of practice. They are as they are. Cynthia's team is working on our improvement metrics, our timeline around those, and we will absolutely share those with you, and you will have that, and also the resource required. But you'll understand that that in itself will take some time to do. What we wanted to do was come here and share the findings with you in advance of that.
Okay, thank you. Robbie Butler.
Thank you, Chair. Donna, Sarah and Cynthia, I'm having to look at your names again. I tried to memorise them there, but I couldn't. So thank you for what you've done so far. I just want to thank the members for the questions that put to you. I've found them very useful, and the information that's been provided today has been good, and it's just a pity we didn't have it a number of weeks ago. And I'm listening to things so far, and if it sounds like I'm asking the same question, I'm genuinely not. There's another level to this, but I've had to write this down because there's quite a lot to it. But it looks to me that there was certainly a chronic cultural failure with regard to supporting and resourcing some of the most valued and vulnerable pupils in our schools. Okay, I think that's accepted. But the issues which jumped out at me from the pages and from some of your own reports was the attitudinal dismissal of statutory frameworks, the potential abuse or ignorance of the 7 valid exemptions, which hopefully we'll hear a wee bit more about. And inexplicably, within a single umbrella organisation, that staff were operating on multiple databases and platforms. And I know we've talked about the Capita system, but that's not databases. Databases are simple Microsoft issues. So that's nothing to do with a system. I think that's incredible within one umbrella organisation to me. So therefore, when you look at those 3 things out of the wider range of failures, it's easy to see why there was such a magnitude of failure. We've talked about the 85% who did not complete in the time frame. So my first question would be, how on earth did it take a whistleblowing allegation to bring this to where we are now, and why was it not recognised? We talked about the audit committee, the board, and perhaps where management is. How was it not picked up as a red flag before someone was prepared to whistleblow?
Well, as I said, there was certainly feedback, Robbie. I mean, as I say, I met with parents directly myself. Karen has described some of the feedback that she has provided. School principals have provided feedback in this area, so I think it was more a trigger at that point in order to be able to absolutely understand the exact nature and the exact extent. So general feedback that things needed to be improved, but what I wanted from the audit was an absolute clarity around the nature and the extent of the issues, so that we could have a very targeted improvement plan there. As Donna said, there was one in place and one that was developed, and yes, it was progressing, but what became clear to me was that it wasn't having the desired impact or outcome that it ought to have, and that was part of what we wanted the audit to have a look at as well. Were the improvements taking place on the ground? Were they having the impact on the ground? And the audit concluded that no, they were not.
And I appreciate that, sir, and I think we focused on today in the good work and good practice that's been going on that you've initiated, and I get that. What I don't understand is how it was at 1,070. We're sitting outside the statutory timeline, and that either on a monthly or quarterly basis that the responsible person wasn't highlighting it either to yourself or to the board as a major concern. I don't understand, and my fear is this, that whilst we might be able to fix this and come up with something, what is the actual framework and measurement of preventing that happening again? What does that look like on a quarterly basis, that some responsible person is able to say to you, this is our target, we have met, or we're not meeting our target and I need more resources. So rather than the piece of work that's been done, what does that assurance look like?
So that's our performance management framework as an organisation is currently under development, and that will be about all of our routine reporting and what will come through to the executive team and onward to board. And Donna is actually leading on the development of that, and that's what are our routine indicators. I feel very strongly, and I think I said that to you, I said at the start, it won't be enough for us to simply describe to you how we're making improvements. We are absolutely going to have to demonstrate to you how we're making those improvements, and particularly if those improvements are going to take place over time, so that you can see sustained progress, so that I can see sustained progress. So that is absolutely fundamental, and I fully accept your point on that, and that's what I've committed to bringing back to committee when we have those metrics fully developed, because it will not be enough in order to restore confidence for us to say we are making improvements. We are going to have to fully and absolutely demonstrate those improvements, and I accept that.
Just to finish this one out, I've got 2 more questions, if you wouldn't mind, because you did ask Chair to come back to the
No, that's fine. Yeah, I'd like to supplement you on this point as well. So
okay,
go ahead with yours, and then I can go ahead. Yeah,
okay,
go ahead.
So in terms of the valid exceptions,
Wait then, see, hold on, we're valid exceptions then, okay, right? Okay. So, in terms of non-compliance, I mean, are we saying that people were not providing the relevant processes with information, with real information in relation to how bad this was? That doesn't seem to have been covered in the findings here. So, I mean, I think these are questions with regards to why systemic failure wasn't identified and audited by the EA board are probably for the EA board to answer. What the EA board's doing to establish why there was a failure to identify this is a question for the board as well. But in your audit, have you picked up any evidence of anything akin to a cover-up or a lack of proactive provision of up-to-date and accurate information with regards to these processes? Because that's going to prevent the EA board from doing its job.
I suppose that is one of the findings that we do address. We talk about, routine standardised management information reports were not systematically or routinely produced or used for senior management. So that was a gap in the previous process. As Sarah said, we're about to implement a performance management framework that we will be providing, and I mean we, in terms of my team and the independents from my team, will be producing and pulling off our big systems management information, and then we will be reporting that through to directors and onward to the chief executive and on to board, so there will be much more visibility around this performance management.
What did internal audit processes look like? Like, what was the internal auditing of directorates? What is the existing EA board process of auditing each directorate and its performance?
There is I think internal audit.
Either that broke down or the information provided to it broke down. Which one was it?
I think there is a distinction between the internal audit process itself versus what would be routine performance management information. And as Donna says, moving forward, where we want to get to be is that this information is routinely provided, and not only is it routinely provided, but it's routinely provided and publicly available. And that is our goal moving forward. So you won't have to ask me where we are. You will be able to see that at any given time. And that
I appreciate that, and that is welcome. But the interest, the public interest here is what happened, what were the EA internal audit processes that did not pick this systemic failing up, and was it inadequate internal audit processes, or was it inadequate provision of information to those audit processes? Can you give us some insight into that?
My sense would be that it was around the information that was provided, rather than an internal audit process per se, because actually if you're providing routine management information, as Donna has described, then you don't necessarily need to undertake an internal audit because you're aware of and clear about the issues.
I can't work out why it's in anyone's interest not to report difficulties dealing with...
That is why we are here today, Chris.
Okay. And I mean, that is concerning though, because the inadequate provision of information in relation to this process may well extend to other processes within a particular directorate that does not deal with just this process. And a board will struggle to perform its functions if it is being kept in the dark about challenges within its organisation.
One of the challenges.
Robbie, keen to bring in on valid exceptions as well. Thank you for your indulgence.
Okay, just before I go off that, and the reason that I'm focused in on that one, Chair, was previously in another guise in the fire service that as a manager, I had to report back, but I only reported back on the questions that were asked in terms of performance, in terms of output. So I'm just keen to know in terms of what was being asked of those people to report, and maybe it was, as the Chair has rightly said, is it the reporting mechanism that's wrong? Because if it's not asking the right questions, it's not going to get the right information. And it seems to me that 1,070 children outside of that statutory framework should have been picked up on both counts, in that it should have been reported. The second, it should have been sought, the information should have been sought. As an MLA, and I'm sure the rest of the panel members will probably have a little bit of our eyes open today in terms of when we're trying to reach into the EA for information for frustrated parents and pupils who are trying to access the psychological assessment and those type of things. That very often there were excuses like someone was off sick, someone was off for say, maternity, or someone was on holiday. We know that the databases were an issue, so there probably weren't shared information, but there didn't seem to be any accountability for anybody for transferring cases. And as opposed to it sat with someone's desk and it just seemed to sit there forever. Would that be an accurate analysis that cases were with individuals, and if that individual wasn't there, there was no responsibility or no policy that said this is how someone else has responsibility for that case or the overall caseload?
I suppose I can only comment on the statutory statement and process, but yeah, I mean we did find that there wasn't that proactive management, so therefore, you know. Because there was no routine management information used, there was no kind of helicopter view in terms of the team, and you know, if there was a case sitting for a long period of time and perhaps maybe somebody was off, that wasn't proactively managed is what we found. Yeah.
I've just got one more question, and it's not off piece, but it actually is.
Go ahead.
Justin's piece, okay?
You save yourself 30 seconds every time by just asking the question, Robin.
I'm just looking at you to tell me off.
I never tell you off. Go ahead.
Listen, I don't want to add the very serious issues that you guys are dealing with, okay? But we must be clear that we're focusing on children
absolutely
who need some form of assessment process. But as Justin rightly alluded to, there are lots of children who can't even access the process. So my fear is that, and it's right that we focus on fixing the problem in the backlog, okay? But are we fixing something that actually needs fixed itself in terms of the whole problem? Because, sorry, you have said time and time again, this is pupil-centred, it's individually focused and so on. Well, if that is the case, and our teachers are telling us that they're frustrated because there are pupils going through years of education without the ability to access the educational psychologist or assessment for special education needs, and yourself, you'll know you've been frustrated many times, and it's good to see you there. And whilst I want to see this fixed and this backlog addressed, can we have confidence that actually what we're going to get is a fundamental review and recommendations to improve the whole process? I think it really is what we're at.
Yes, Robbie. Yes, Robbie, absolutely. I think we have a responsibility right here and right now to those children who are currently in the statementing process, and that has been our immediate focus. But moving forward, and the longer term plans are around looking at the entire end-to-end journey for children in this process, because otherwise, you're quite right, there is no point in running something faster, for example, if it's not the right thing to run. And I am absolutely at one with you on that.
Right. Okay, thank you.
And indeed, there is a wider departmental review of SEM provision that has been ongoing for 10 years.
Yeah.
So maybe this is a timely point to ask a question. To what extent did inadequate resources contribute to this feeling?
It's difficult to comment, Chris, without the analysis, but I suppose what we certainly do know, and what Cynthia has encountered already working with the teams, is that we do believe that even in the short term, in terms of addressing this backlog, we will require more resources. We also are clear already that we will require additional resources in order to put the support services in place, not just to run the statementing process. And that's the work that we're trying to do, to quantify and to look at how much additional resource do we need. I would say internally as an organisation we will be prioritising those immediate staff resources, and that will certainly be an issue for us to address, but we're clear that we will require additional resource.
Because in addition to extreme difficulty accessing statement, there is also significant reports, I presume, across MLAs of significant difficulty accessing the statemented support once it is in place. And indeed, obviously, you know, to build on Robbie's question, the statementing process itself is scheduled to change from 5 stages to 3 stages. Will your operations be ready to respond to those changes given what has been identified by the audit?
It will depend on the implementation date, Chris, and it will also depend on the level of resource that comes with those changes.
Okay. In terms of the valid exceptions, okay, there's 8 valid exceptions. Seven.
Yeah.
They are further advice to be sought by the board to complete its assessment, which seems extremely wide-ranging. Parents wish to provide advice to the board more than 6 weeks after they were invited to do so. Advice from a school principal is delayed because of a school closure. Advice sought from a Health and Social Service Trust has not been provided within 6 weeks. Exceptional personal circumstances affect the child or the parent. The child or parent is away for at least 4 weeks during the 18-week period, or an appointment for examination or test is not kept. To what extent are those 7 valid exceptions fit for purpose, and which ones of is there any pattern as to which one or few of those exceptions were used to accept a statement being, or an assessment being completed within 26 weeks?
In terms of the valid exceptions themselves, just to say that they are in the legislation, and we do expect when the legislation changes that they will change, and certainly that's part of the conversations and discussions we've been having with DE in terms of their fit for purpose and timeliness today. Donna, in terms of the range of valid exceptions?
Yeah, I mean, that is one of the recommendations as a team. You know, whilst they're in the legislation, we believe, setting aside the practice, we believe actually they're not helpful in terms of the statement and process, because there's no upper limit. So you could legally apply a valid exception because there's a delay in receiving health advice. There's no upper limit in that, but the new legislation, there are upper limits that, you know, if the advice is not received within a period of time. So I think that's one of, as a team, we felt that was one of the weaknesses in that. So I suppose it is important to say that they are legal to apply a valid exception, and there are deficiencies in the valid exceptions themselves that have led to some of the issues. In answer to probably your question about one of the major ones that we encountered is the valid exception around health advices. So that the audit team were given information that highlighted that almost 2/3 of the valid exceptions that were applied were due to health advice not being provided, and then about 24% was other professionals, schools or parents within 6 weeks. So
did we ask how many of the 1,070 cases that were beyond the 26th deadline had valid exceptions?
I don't think you asked me that, no.
Can I?
I don't have the exact figure, but what I would say is a considerable amount. I would say a high percentage had valid exceptions, yes.
And 2/3 of the valid exceptions were as a result of advice sought from a Health and Social Service Trust not being provided within 6 weeks?
Yes, that was the valid exception that had been applied to the case.
Did the audit or has the EA explored what reasons exist for a Health and Social Service Trust to not provide advice within 6 weeks?
I suppose it's important to say that the team acknowledged that there are definite delays, you know, with regard to advices and specifically medical information being received. We also believed that, once the valid exception had been applied, that proactive management, so we did have evidence where valid information had been received back from health, but actually the case hadn't been moved on because there wasn't that proactive management.
Once that 26-week deadline was breached, it was breached, and the deadlines weren't there anymore. But
we have worked, we have been doing work with health, Chris, and I think it goes back to that the audit itself was designed to provide us with the nature and the extent of the issues. And as I think I said, it raises as many questions for us. We have been doing work with health. We know that DE are working closely with health around the new regulations and the new legislation so that we can actually be much more clear and specific around actually what health advice is required, why do we require it, and how long ought that to take.
This predecessor committee hosted an evidence session on similar or same matters at Stranlath College, Clark. Indeed. And health staff presented, and this issue was identified as an issue. I think it's incumbent on anyone with responsibility for these matters to further probe what is happening in that failure for Health and Social Service Trust to provide information within 6 weeks. Is it a reasonable deadline?
I was going to say, Chris, I think
it doesn't seem like the audit had scope to properly investigate that aspect of it, and we're talking about 2/3 of valid exceptions, a high percentage of cases beyond 26 weeks being valid exceptions. So I think there's a real need to investigate what the Health and Service Trust role is in relation to this process.
I would agree with you, but I would also draw back to Robbie's point, which is actually I think we need to look at the full process.
Okay. And is that being done?
It will be.
By the Department and the Education Authority?
Yes.
Okay. Bring Daniel McCrossan back in.
Thank you, Chair. And it's just around the 1070 figure. Given that some have waited up to 2 years to be statemented or reviewed, I'm just thinking about the overall rippling consequences of that on a classroom environment. The burden that places in terms of stress on the teacher, on the head principal, and directly the other pupils or children in the classroom. And I think one of the biggest stressors in this for the teachers and also the principals is how you manage that resource. The resource is non-existent. So if a child in a classroom is distressed or in need of attention, that teacher diverts their immediate attention, in the absence of a classroom assistant or support staff, which in many cases that's the reality, to that child. So in actual fact, throughout this entire process, quite a number of children have suffered the consequences of this failure. Would that be inaccurate?
I think, Daniel, that we go back to my original point, which is it is easy to see this as an administrative process. It is not an administrative process. It is something that impacts greatly on children, and that is why I take it so seriously, and it is because of the impact of this process on children. Cynthia, I don't know if you want to comment from a school perspective.
Well, certainly from a school perspective, I would concur with what you're saying. Obviously, unmet need and undue delay will have an impact in the classroom, and for the child, for other children, for staff and frontline that are dealing with that, and also for head teachers and pastoral care heads who are working with families through that. So I suppose I reiterate what I have said, before. This is something we absolutely have to fix. It is unacceptable that there are these delays. I concur that there have been people failed within the system, and we will do our best moving forward to make sure that this is better.
And I suppose the funding of vital and necessary resources in terms of support staff and other elements is hugely important, particularly for the school and more directly for those children that are impacted. Thank you for that answer. Just briefly, Chair, there's a number of other things. How long do you think it's going to take to implement some of the recommendations or the changes that you are proposing here? What is the time frame to get these into place? Touched that when I left the room.
Well, we do have the action plan, as Cynthia said. What we want to try and do now is to put very clear and robust improvement metrics around that action plan, so that it's not just a series of actions, if you like, that we give our assessment on to you as to whether or not they've been concluded, but that we're actually measuring the impact of that, and we can show and demonstrate that improvement. So that's what I've committed to bringing back to the committee, so that we can give you a robust and accurate assessment of how long it will take and how much resource will be required to deliver it.
And thank you for that answer as well. Just briefly, Chair, I'm battling with myself throughout this entire session about the independence of, or about the audit process generally. What made you opt for an internal audit as opposed to an fully independent audit?
Well, as I said, at that point in time, Daniel, I too had heard feedback around these areas, and what I wanted to do was to get an assessment of the extent and the nature of the issues in relation to that feedback, and I had a team of people who within the organisation who could do that and who had full trust and confidence in to deliver that. So that's the approach that I took. It brings us this audit today, which tells us and outlines for us what it is. It is findings, and it is the nature and the impact. But as I've said, it clearly has implications now wider and beyond this process, and we will have to attend to those.
And I appreciate that. And just to follow on from the Chair's point, the Chair rightly expresses, as will other members around this committee, of concerns for other directorates, areas of responsibility across EA. And if this is what has been exposed as a result of an internal audit, have you any concerns that there may be other substantial issues within other areas of EA that will need the same approach?
I think that's certainly what our performance management framework is designed to do, which is to provide me with early alerts and routine information on all of the areas of EA business, so that we can, where we need to, have a deeper and further look.
And Sarah, just in relation to that, and again, given that you're only in the role a short time, do you not feel it would be much more beneficial to get a clearer picture, to have an entire independent review of EA, so that we know exactly where the starting point is and what needs to be achieved as a result of it? Because if we're going to do this bit by bit approach, and we get a report and we get a report, I think this is going to lead into considerable difficulty and time delays, and also maybe further revelations in terms of what we've heard today in other areas. So I'm just coming back to this view that a full independent review is going to be necessary of the Education Authority now after today. And I'm just wondering, from your own view, given that you're in the organisation now just under a year, would you share that view? Would you be open to that?
I would be open to that. I wouldn't have a fixed view on it. I do have a view that we have attended an awful lot to structures and processes in education over a long period of time, and I believe we've done that to the detriment of services and service delivery. I would like our focus moving forward to be on services, service delivery, the service we provide to children and young people, and I do want us as an education authority to be able to instil and build confidence in the public and our wider stakeholders, and I think part of that has to be that we can show and demonstrate that we are an organisation that can hold ourselves to account, and that we are an organisation that has robust governance arrangements, that we can highlight and bring forward things like this ourselves, rather than always relying on someone else to do that on our behalf. But that's my own.
It's a mammoth task, and I appreciate
that
you will
too.
take it seriously.
And we are a very large organisation, a very complex organisation. So it's balancing all of that up.
And Chair, just a final point. It's just of the many families affected, many children affected of their families, how many of them have been pushed to tribunals to try and get provision for their children? Are you aware of those figures?
Yeah, we have figures around that, and again, that is one of the areas that we've covered in the audit, and one of the areas that we talked about in one of the recommendations that I called the SAP panel, which is the Statutory Assessment Panel. That's where they make decisions about whether to proceed with a statement, and the information that we have highlighted that there were a number of cases that were either conceded once they went to tribunal or were overturned, and that's an area, again, in terms of our findings and in terms of the recommendations, there needs to be work done around the decision-making process around statements so that parents don't feel they need to go to tribunal. Obviously there's an issue around our decision making when we're conceding a high volume of cases, so absolutely that's an area that we highlighted in the audit.
Can you share some of those figures?
Yeah. So in 18-19 there were 341 cases, appeals that were handled, and out of those 340 there was 341, there were 184 that were conceded by the Education Authority.
184 conceded, sorry, yeah.
Yeah. And we as an audit team felt that was considerably high, and it indicated that there was an issue. There was an issue around the decision-making process. As I say, it's one of our findings and it's one of our recommendations. But it's included in the improvement work going forward.
Did that not red flag anything?
It did to us as an audit team, absolutely, hence why it's in the findings, and we have a separate...
Prior to the audit, how in 2018-19 were 1 and 2 appeals being conceded and no one anywhere thought this was a red flag?
And also, Chair, the stress of that placed on a parent who may not be equipped to deal with the internal processes that they've had to go through in order to fight for the interests of their children to get what they should have got long before that. That frustrates me. I mentioned that specifically because my own sister had to go through it. So I know the stress on her and the preparation that had to be taken, as well as dealing with her child who was in desperate need. And I'm also concerned as well, when you look at 1 and 2, the cost of that process, the resources pumped into that process, and the wastage, the obvious wastage now, given that 1 in every 2 were conceded. And that will come as a great annoyance to many principals and teachers who have been starved of necessary resources to support those children within a country. So there's huge lessons to be learned here, and we can sit all day around this committee and take considerable chunks out of what has happened in the past until now. But I sincerely hope that we can rectify this and sort it out and instill some confidence in it for our children more than anything. And Sarah, again, I know you're new to the role, and you have my best wishes and support in trying to rectify it, but I do not envy the task that is ahead and the challenges that you'll face in that. And I have no doubt that, unfortunately, this will not be the end of some of the issues that are going to arise.
Okay. Very brief supplementary from me on a previous issue. How and by whom is are the Health and Social Service Trusts held account for not providing advice within 6 weeks? It's not clear. They're not.
So there has been work ongoing between the Education Authority, Education and Health under the Children's Services Cooperation Act. And Health and Social Services Trusts have appointed SEND coordinators because they recognise that this is a challenge for them in terms of the Health and Social Services Trusts. We may be seeking advice from a number of professionals within the health or within the trust. So SEND coordinators have been appointed to streamline processes and improve timescales for return of medical devices to EA. When we spoke to the teams, this work has only started in terms of these SEND coordinators being appointed probably from about September last year, but there was evidence that that had improved performance already with those SEND coordinators, and it's anticipated that there will be more improvements in those areas with the appointment of that additional resource.
In an age of Children's Services Cooperation Act and joined up government, it is deeply concerning that that delay from Health and Social Care Trusts in relation to the provision of medical advice is such a significant contributor to delays of processing assessments. That clearly does need to be explored.
Chair,
Deputy Chair, do you want to come in?
Could I just come in on that one? I was going to ask
a few questions to ask also,
no,
Deputy Chair? No, just this, okay.
Just that, it was just really then, and I know the review has brought up more questions.
Yeah.
But, you know, how proactive would the EA staff been in following up medical reports as well? Or did they just with it came back on?
There were varying degrees of that, Karen, but yes, in some areas we wouldn't have been proactive. In a number of areas, we wouldn't have been proactive in terms of following that advice up. It was considered that there were going to be delays, so not always followed up, no.
And the trust saying coordinators, is there one in each trust?
One in each trust, yeah. And that has definitely improved in terms of even the staff in our teams and our offices having somebody to contact and liaise with. So it's definitely an improvement, yeah.
Good, thank you.
Okay, Robin, and then Justin to finish.
Thank you, Chair. And I was going to refer to William and point Justin made earlier about culture. But can I ask you, Sarah, is it your responsibility to accept the 10 recommendations, and
Yes.
it's your responsibility? Fine, that's grand. Can I ask you about number 10 then? Where it isn't talking about, where William was mentioning about the culture, where Justin was mentioning about the culture, where members were concerned about whether number 10, you know, that the culture that had applied in this SEN area may be in other areas. What's your schedule for addressing that number 10 issue?
Number 10 being the transfer of learning from this audit across the Education Authority. Yep.
But I think that is via the performance management framework, and I think the other thing is that it is also the start of the culture of improvement, that where we take findings in one area, we apply them across, rather than potentially them being siloed, if you like, within individual directorates, so that we ensure. So I think number 10 is very important for me in terms of ensuring that we don't do a piece of work in one area where there are lessons learnt and things that can be done, and we don't apply them across the other areas, and that we do that in a more systematic way through our performance framework.
Okay. The next time we see you,
Yes.
I'm making that assumption, Chair, and you're...
I think it'll be soon. Yep.
We will have a performance framework which will have dates and targets and
Yes.
personal responsibilities,
Yes.
measurements, end date. Okay, well that's good. Can I just take you, and I was a little bit concerned when we talked about the communication, and reference was made to a helpline. A helpline in these circumstances, Chair, I would suggest is not going to be adequate, given what will go out after this meeting. And I wonder if maybe, Chair, you might think, Sarah, about a better approach, a more empathetic approach to the parents in terms of that direct face-to-face contact with the parents or the guardians or their representatives.
I don't think the helpline is to substitute for that, Robin. We were just conscious that we are here today having this conversation, and that if any parents feel in immediate distress, there are trained staff there available to deal with that, but that's not a substitute for any of the ongoing communication, which I agree in terms of face-to-face, and so it's not an either-or scenario.
So can I just, I mean, you're going to be proactive in that field now, am I right?
Yes.
Yes.
I suppose one of the Chief Executive made reference to some of the short-term resource that we need to put in, and we're mindful that one of the areas for short-term resource would be in trying to make the offices more front-facing, where we can have that contact with children.
Thanks, Ron. I think those are pertinent points. In relation to the first one, in terms of regular update and substantive update to the committee, with detailed performance metrics attached to the 10 key recommendations, can you give us an idea as to how soon you could return to the committee with more robust framework for the implementation of those recommendations?
Our original plan for that, Chair, had been the end of March.
Okay. And in terms of parental engagement, I think that is a very pertinent point, Robin, in terms of the importance of that. I presume there are families of 1,070 children, 676. So it is not inconceivable that you could hold engagement with parents. I know in response to the opposition to the proposed reduction of SEND nursery hours to part-time, Parents for Equal Education Coalition was established and has been engaged with around some of these issues. It may be well worthwhile in seeking to engage with the Parents for Equal Education Coalition. You know, I'm sure you have contact details for that, but if we can be of any assistance in that regard, or with facilitated engagement with parents, we're more than willing to do that as well.
Okay, thank you. That's appreciated.
Justin?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Just finally, look, we've talked a lot about the performance process, databases, metrics, systems, all the hard stuff. Culture, I want to talk about culture again. Culture is the soft stuff, and the soft stuff is the hard stuff. It's an abstract and analogous term, and changing culture in organisations such as the Education Authority is no easy undertaking. And I would impress upon you the importance of maybe appointing an external consultant to guide you in that work. And the bedrock of a company's culture is the company's values, and values aren't about writing out words on the wall. They're values, if embraced properly, they guide your behaviour and drive your performance. So I encourage you to seek advice on that, and your values must be interwoven into every aspect of your organisation's being. That doesn't happen by just putting them on the wall. It happens by discussing them regularly. I want to thank each of you for appearing before us today. It's been tough for you to sit where you are today, and we appreciate your honesty and your endeavour and your determination to put things right, and we wish you well with the major task you all face. Best of luck.
Okay. Any other members' final comments or questions? No? Okay. Building on, to conclude, and building on what Justin has said there, and in his earlier identification of the mission of the Education Authority, deliver a quality education for every child, openness, transparency. I think your evidence and your engagement with the committee today has been in line with that mission. We thank you for that. We welcome the apology that you've given to families affected. We welcome the action that you've taken to establish the extent of the failure to assess and support children with special educational needs, and the urgent actions that you've put in place to progress those assessments and the delivery of that support. But there are further questions that perhaps even you can't answer that we need to pursue with other bodies. And I think more than one MLA has suggested today that a full independent review of the Education Authority is necessary to fully re-establish confidence. But I thank you for your openness, your transparency, the action that you have taken to do all you can to restore that confidence to the extent that you can do on this particular issue. And we will seek a soon future hearing with you to hear exactly how those 10 recommendations are being progressed. Okay. Thank you, officials. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, are members content for us to take a very, very brief comfort break before we close up proceedings today? Yeah, is that okay?
Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30.
Okay, members, we're back in public session. Can I ask the clerk to initiate our recap of actions from that evidence session?
Mr. Chairperson, if I've understood correctly, the committee wants to write to the Education Authority. We're seeking an update on the timescales and the performance framework, and I anticipate we'll be getting that as a briefing at the end of March, as the Chief Executive indicated. I think we're also probably asking about education psychology service, and looking for, I think the Chief Executive indicated they were considering a review of that, so we're looking for the details in terms of reference timescales.
To speak to that briefly, Clerk, and it was a genuine misunderstanding clearly, but my question was, given the areas of responsibility that have been exposed as so systemically inadequate, what other areas fell under that managerial responsibility? And one of those is the allocation of educational psychology, and it will be a number of other areas as well, so it will be meritorious to get an update with regards to any review into those particular areas as well. Thank you, Clerk.
Additionally then, we would ask the Education Authority about its plans to improve parental engagement around the SEND statementing process. And then I think is the committee also wanting to write to the Education Authority Board, asking it for its overview of these matters, particularly around the internal audit functions. So there would have been members like in the Assembly to explain, there's an internal audit function so that I will be audited every couple of years. They go and look at whatever money I spend as the part of the committee, and they look at my correspondence and how I look after it and that kind of thing. So there would be an audit, a programme of audits. So the question there would be, why wouldn't this have been picked up by the programme of audits, which the Education Authority internal audit function was doing? And that, I think, is a question for the board.
I would agree that, if members agree it, but I would also add to that we invite the EA Board Chair, the EA Board Audit Committee Chair, and the EA Board Children and Young People Services Committee Chair to the committee to update the committee with regards to their response to this audit report. Okay. Members content? Agreed. Okay.
Very good. Also writing then to the departments, asking it whether or what its plans are to investigate health and social care delays in the interaction between the two. You can see in the information that I included at, here we go, page 131. The chair was actually referencing this earlier, that the predecessor committee took a joint briefing from Education and Health in 2016, where they talked about the SEN cooperation group. So we've been sort of down this road a wee bit before, so it's basically an update on that and the issues around health and social care delays.
What is there a briefing scheduled on that, or are we requesting one? Your proposal was to write to seek an update in relation to that. I would also propose that we invite the Minister and the Permanent Secretary of the Department to the committee to respond to the findings of the audit report, and perhaps part of that response can be to detail how education and health are cooperating to address the delay in the advice providing process of the assessment. Are members content with that? Clerk, we are scheduled to receive a briefing next week with regards to the Department of Education SEN framework.
The new framework, the 5 stages becoming 3.
I mean, I would hope that it might be viable for and it can be time bound, but that it would be possible for the Permanent Secretary and the Minister to perhaps attend that meeting to respond to this report. Okay. And then move on to the SEN framework, which is extremely related, and include reference to enhanced cooperation between education and health as part of that assessment process. Okay. Are members content? Yeah, agreed.
I can ask them. Yep,
yeah, okay. Okay, thank you.
Right, and I think perhaps also, do members want to write to the department just asking about the treatment of the breaches of the statutory timescales? Because the evidence that the committee has been presented with is, yes, they have been breached. So what are the consequences, legal or otherwise, for that?
Yep, agreed.
Very good. That was it, I think. Chairperson, also there's a draft press release.
Can I just before we finish, I would like to try and understand it. I know they said there was they would have an empathetic communication. Earlier it was there's a helpline. I really don't think helpline in these circumstances is sufficient. I really would like to try and understand now how they're going to actually deal with the empathetic contact.
Okay. Given
guardian, whatever.
Given that we've raised that by yourself, Robin, with them today, I think it would be appropriate for a written request for an urgent written update from the Education Authority with regards to how they will enhance adequate engagement with parents around these findings.
Chairperson. Chair.
Okay. Deputy Chair, Karen Mullen.
Should we write to the Minister, or will we wait to the command of the meeting to raise with them around what most people have raised here today about an independent aspect to this review? Do we ask at this stage, because the review maybe has been done or the audit, for independent oversight even, and then, so I don't know if we want to...
I think we can include in the written correspondence to the Department of the Minister requesting attendance next week.
Because I know Morris referred to that as well, Chair, but the fact that we have agreed that they are coming back to give us a report at the end of the month on their progress, and it really is whether or not I'm suggesting is perhaps that whether we're satisfied with the report progress at that stage, then we might make a decision on an independent review.
Yeah, well, two things, I suppose. One, I think our question to the Minister would be, does the Minister consider an independent review necessary? So we don't need to prejudice a committee position as such, other than a question.
Yeah.
I think the sincerity, the comprehensiveness of the existing EA leadership with regards to actioning these recommendations is not in doubt. There are, however, wider questions that are very difficult for them to answer, that I think has prompted questions with regards to independent review. But so I think they may even be two different things to a certain extent, but they can be further considered, and I think what we're proposing is that we ask the Minister, does he consider it necessary? Karen?
Just that we're ensuring that we are capturing it, the true and real picture. I think, you know, what has been done so far seems to be comprehensive, but, you know, Robin's pointing out parental and that, you know, and other stakeholders, which I had mentioned, the Children's Law Centre and the Commissioner, you know, it would be very important that they're involved as well. So,
and I mean, however comprehensive the audit has been and the commitment is to actioning the recommendations that have been identified, it can't and it hasn't asked how that developed, or some of the wider questions around that as to whether it pertains to other areas. So there are follow-up matters for us here in that regard. Other actions, Clark? Sorry, Justin. Yeah.
Just back to the issue I was focusing on a lot there, questioning the guys was culture, and I would like to outline how they propose to change the organisation's culture. The explanation is how they are going to go back to the undertaking, because that's no mean task.
I'll keep my comment on that brief, not least given previous advice and guidance, but the findings focus quite significantly on managerial practice, but then also referenced culture. So I think it's a pertinent question. We'll submit it, but there was a slight contradiction there in terms of the identification of managerial practice or the lack thereof, and also acknowledgement that there was instances of good practice from staff despite limitations, but then it did also in the recommendations propose a need for cultural change as well. So I think we definitely need to draw that out further, Justin. So it's a very worthwhile.
Culture is all encompassing. Culture is the good pieces and the bad pieces, but
absolutely
involve that culture so it embellishes only.
Do you, Chair, would it be possible to have a breakdown of the areas? To give us a sort of a map of where the feelings really have been?
In the offices? I think reference was made to all 5 offices, but
Chairperson, I'll definitely ask for that. I suspect the answer is going to be no until the process is concluded, but no, we'll ask the question.
Okay. Let you proceed, Clark, there with further actions.
I think that was it. There's also a draft press release if their members are content.
How does a committee agree a press release? Do all members have to agree it, or do you read it? Or
I would like it if they did. If they read it and all unanimously agreed it, that would be good.
William said it's fine.
Yeah. It's William's fault if it's
necessary. We can vote, but
I've read it. I'm content with it. Yeah, members content. Okay.
Content, Julie.
I think you'd be content.
Take a moment.
It's William's fault if you're not. Have a glance. Have a glance there. Any other? Whilst we're just considering that, any other actions, Clark? No.
I think that was that.
Okay.
Members. So
okay. We have a short correspondence item declared here then, Clark, as well.
Just in terms of the shared education, then is committee are content to defer.
Agreed.
Thanks, Chairperson. And then it's correspondence land.
Okay. Do you want to speak to correspondence, Clark?
Please, Chairperson. So if members
turn to page 357. There's the summary note of the 11 items that we received. If members are content to dispose of them as per the covering note, and with the following exceptions. So the first one, 7.3, this is at page 365. This is about pupil work experience. So the Education Authority has come back with an answer. I'm not sure that I think they've really answered the question about what has changed. I looked up the guidance and I'm struggling to understand what the issue is. So members content for clerk to write again, try to get a better answer, a more fulsome answer out of the Education Authority, and perhaps even if members can help the clerk out here, is there a particular thing that was troubling the schools in question? Maybe they can come back to me afterwards. But in the meantime, I'll write.
Members maybe take a closer look at the EA response that's on page 367, I think it is, Clerk, yeah?
Yep.
And we can come back to that at a future meeting. Content?
I'm content.
Robin, yep.
I think the chair, the problem is that they want pupils out for work experience at various levels. They want to place them in different organisations as close to what the pupil actually wants. Not always possible. And within the placements, there's very often no structure of what actually, there is a signing up, but I've one at the moment. I take them all. I take them on the basis of work experience, and I place an emphasis on work. I don't believe that everybody that takes a pupil takes them on work experience.
Okay, well it's a very important area of provision, so we'll digest the response and we'll return to that, members. Okay, Clark.
In terms of the others then, 7.7, which is at page 385, it's from the Ulster University. They want to come along and brief on their report on teachers' attitude to digital skills. So I put that into the draft forward work programme if members are content. Take that briefing.
Clark, content that I proposed the addition of MTech Academy to that session as well.
You did.
Members content with that, yeah? Okay.
Also then at 396.
Some correspondence I suggest inserting after the committee is very clear that the onus is now firmly on the Education Authority and Department of Education to ensure that the right policy systems and people are put in place, allied with the necessary cultural change to ensure that a situation like this does not arise in the future. So insert allied with the necessary cultural change.
Content with that, yep.
Okay. Just get them to say agreed.
Yep. Agreed. Can you say agreed? Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Okay,
members. Clark, you want to proceed with correspondence there? Yep.
So at page 396, a letter from Employers for Childcare asking to brief the committee. I've preliminarily arranged this that they would brief alongside Early Years Organisation. Just for members' information, the department contacted me last week saying they wanted to brief the committee on around the 27th of May on changes to preschool entitlement. So this is one of the questions. Okay. I think it's linked to universal credit and the criteria. So 27th of May, it's in the draft. If members are content.
Okay.
Good.
Great.
Then we have a page 397. We've dealt with that. Page 595. It's a memo from the EU Affairs Manager on the Interparliamentary Forum on Brexit. I think, Chairperson, I'm right in saying that Brexit appears to have a limited relevance for education. There was an issue around the allocation of some additional money for the Education Authority, but that turned out to be around currency exchanges. I think Ms Mullen asked that question. So are the members content for the clerk to write to the department just to confirm the limited relevance that Brexit has for education?
Or the relevance Brexit has for education.
Indeed, confirm the relevance, yes.
I'm conscious schemes like Erasmus, for example, but I presume that falls to the Department of Economy, given that it is primarily higher education, although not exclusively. So perhaps we could reference the significance for the Erasmus programmes.
Ryan, well, that's not, what's going to happen. Yes, Chairperson. And then finally...
I'm sorry, excuse me. Shared education where it's cross-border, how does Brexit impact that?
Well, there was, we were hoping we were going to get an answer from members today. There was actually something in the news yesterday that apparently it looked like some schemes were going to continue for a further number of years. So those are the many questions that I will seek an answer to from the department.
Agreed.
Members are content. And then finally, St Dimna's, County Tyrone. has invited the committee to come and see their work on nurture provisions. So maybe we'll try and schedule that in the autumn. Because if you look at our forward work programme, it is kind of full.
I would urge members to agree to this, because this is actually an unfunded nurture programme within St Dymphna's, and there's amazing work going on by Susan and the staff there in the school. And I think she would greatly welcome us there to see it, and see what they do.
Okay.
Okay. Jolly good.
Yeah. Does that move us on to forward work programme,
It does,
Clark? Yeah.
Chairperson, yeah.
Okay. Can I refer members to the draft forward work programme on page 602? Clark, do you want to speak to items that we need to get agreement for?
So, Chairperson, members had helpfully suggested quite a lot of things to do, and so I've then filled out our dance card to the 1st of July, and it is full. So, if members are I'll just drive you through the main ones. I'm thinking that we would go to Curry and Edenbrook Primary Schools on the 22nd of April. So that would be in the afternoon after the meeting. We'd have our meeting, and then we'd nip out at about maybe 1:30, 2, and try and get to both schools. So generally what I'm trying to do is do these visits where they're handy, where they're in Belfast, on a Wednesday afternoon rather than any other time, if that works. Also, the visit to Lockshore would be on the 6th of May, again in the afternoon after the meeting. I'm suggesting that we have our informal stakeholder event on emotional health and mental well-being on the 13th of May in Parliament Buildings from 6 to 9. So like, it's all there in the forward work programme. Members were very concerned about emotional health and mental well-being. You wanted an event, good idea. The department is in the process of developing this framework. Good idea to talk to the stakeholders and see what they want. So I think an evening event, 6 o'clock to 9, be in Parliament Buildings. It is an awfully long day for members, I would know that.
Could that in any way be adjusted to the 12th of May, potentially?
That would make it a Tuesday, so then it would clash with plenary. And the problem with plenary is there may be votes. But I'm in members'
I have
hands
some
here.
difficulty with Wednesday, the 13th of May.
It doesn't have to be that day. So
Okay,
it could
we'll
be
come
another
back.
day.
We'll maybe come back with a
20th?
date on that.
Do members prefer the 20th? Because
It's a week after. If it's no problem with the chair, then so do you want to just
Clark, I'll speak to you about proposing a couple of other dates if that's okay. Yeah.
Okay, Chairperson. Right, then we have an informal meeting with sectoral bodies on now Tuesday the 19th of May. That'll be 12:30 to 2. So conscious that members are often treble booked now with their all-party groups, but that's what we're trying to do. Is last 2 Tuesdays for informal meetings, and that leaves you the first 2 Tuesdays of every month to do your all-party groups. So the suggestion is that we would go to the City of Derry and the County of Londonderry on the 3rd of June for our meeting. So that we might meet in Oak Grove or Triax.
You might avoid the snow that day.
Why not just do it down here? It's handy for me.
And then we're going to Strabane the next week. And then
I'm not
we're
going to
the other
Strabane,
next
listen.
week.
Go to Maiden City, I'm not going to Strabane.
Also suggesting that we go to Oma, plus a visit to Strull and Oma Sure Start on the 17th of June.
Okay.
Again,
Are these all Wednesdays during the day? Yeah. Okay.
So we would be there, we'd have our meeting there in Oma,
Okay.
and then we would go around Strull and have a look. And I'm also suggesting a visit to Sia, which is down in
Titanic Quarter.
no, it's Claremont Dock. It's near there, so it's 1st of July. And again, that would be in the afternoon after our meeting. And the department has contacted me and asked to defer the common funding scheme brief till sometime in the autumn. So there's an awful lot to look. I've filled in an awful lot of things there. So if members have a good look at those, and if the dates really don't work, just say so, and they're very easily changed.
Okay.
Chairperson.
Robin, we're going to have to get some East Belfast diary dates in here. We'll be getting into trouble. No problem. Okay, members, any other business?
Yes, just one
Go
thing.
ahead, yeah.
Just yourself, the clerk, will know. Has anybody ever raised the question with the Department of Education with regard to the policy in around hustings? I was involved in it just came to me today that I was involved in a bit of a debate locally in Lisburn. There's just certainly an unequal adherence to the policy. There is a policy, there is some guidance, but we need some clarification on that because it's definitely not being adhered to and it's probably not fit for purpose. So a couple of heads have raised that with me.
You're looking to write to the department asking what its guidance is on hustings, political hustings in schools.
Yeah, and
big AQs about it.
Yeah, and then further than that, then to see if it's been in terms of whether they're following it and what happens with it, you know, if it's been followed or not, it's okay.
Yeah, I had raised it, Robbie, during the last election,
Okay.
because we found disparity.
Yes, that's the thing, there's disparity, yeah.
Justin, go
Okay, a
ahead.
very serious matter to close on. The Italian government has closed all schools.
Right, okay.
And so we need strong
Yeah.
and unambiguous direction from our education minister in relation to school trips to Italy.
Well, look, we've presented, we're inviting the Education Minister to take an opportunity to respond to this committee next Wednesday on the findings of the ASEAN audit report. We're inviting him to give us urgent written guidance in relation to these matters, and we'll keep the members updated as to the response. Okay? Members, date of next meeting then is Wednesday, the 11th of March, 9:45 a.m. in room 30, Parliament Buildings. I put the question that the committee meeting does now adjourn. Members agreed? Agreed.
Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30.